see him here. Welcome, Amitabh, to this
Good afternoon.
technical session. So please carry on, Ishwar.
Sir, we are live now.
Okay, should I start?
Yes, you may, please.
Yes, please start.
All distinguished speakers, organizers, viewers, and learners of this ICSSR-sponsored national webinar on society, disaster, and resilience, lessons from literature. We have had a wonderful set of deep insights from the and resilience and its rooted connections with literature and the development of the societies through time. Let us now continue this aura of knowledge which we have already been experiencing since the beginning of this webinar. As we have 27 different insights awaiting to be shared with us in such a short span of time, without much ado, I shall introduce the delegates who would be chairing this afternoon session of the webinar for us. The first half of the session, which is from 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m., shall be chaired by Dr. Amitabh Roy, Vice Principal of Alipur Mahila Mahavidyalaya, Associate Professor in the Department of English in the same college. Vice Principal of Alipur Mahila Mahavidyalaya and Associate Professor of English, He shifted to the teaching profession in the year 2002. He specializes in American literature, just to name a few. He has several publications to his credit and he has a special knack for poetry. He is a keen observer of changes in society and has never hesitated to express his opinions whatsoever. Similarly, the second half of this session from 3:05 p.m. to Dept. who is an associate professor in the Department of English in Kurseong College. Joydeep Bhattacharya has been teaching English in Kurseong since 2005. Poetry, plays of Jennifer and IshwarChDarnal. He has written articles in journals such as JSL, JNU, Rupkatha, Litcrit, IUP Journal of English, and authored a book on Robert Frost. His areas of interest include Indian drama, post-colonial theory, alongside history, religion, environment, etc. Now, without much ado, I invite Dr. Amitabh Roy to chair this session and Dostoevsky's a well-known Russian author of the 19th century who had one of the passages written, and it is very relevant to whatever we are sharing today. So I just want to quote him and then leave it to Dr. Amitabh Roy. He dreamt that the whole world was condemned to a terrible new strange plague that had come to Europe from the depths of, except a very closely. Some new sorts of microbes were attacking bodies of men, but these microbes were endowed with intelligence and will. This was Dostoevsky in 1866 in his We can continue with our session with our respect and the speakers to follow. Thank you so much. Dr. Roy, over to you.
Thank you, Ishwar. And we are in the first technical session of this webinar. And as we know that we have a lot of participants in the first half of this technical session. We have 14 paper presenters now, and already the college authorities and webinar authorities and Ishwar also said that the basic things that I will also want to repeat that the paper presenters, you know that we all had an enlightening session in the first half, and we know the intellectual twist that is given by the webinar authorities to the going to be cliche topic of pandemic or COVID-19 and education, COVID-19 and society, COVID-19 and so on and so forth. So we are talking about society, disaster and resilience. So I hope that all the participants will acknowledge or respond accordingly to this kind of intellectual twist in their paper. And I earnestly request them not to introduce themselves anymore, because we all have the abstract booklet, we all have the soft copies of their names and topics, everything else. So kindly go on with your presentation, sum up it within 4 minutes, and you have to complete it within 5 minutes. Otherwise, we will not be able to complete the session within the stipulated time. So I won't take too much of time. I will just begin. We know that there are papers from various corners of the country. A truly national webinar it's going to be. And our first participant is Dr. Lenora Pereira Y. Madeira, Assistant Professor of St. Xavier's College. Her topic is Lessons in Integration, Assimilation and Dissimilation in Jhumpa Lahiri's The Lowland. So kindly proceed with your paper.
Good afternoon, everyone. So let me remind you that Peter Barry, in his famous theoretical work, Beginning Theory, reminds us that it was the Elizabethan period. Sir Philip Sidney, in his Apology to Poetry, who first stated that a piece of literature aims to teach and to delight. Theorists continue to emphasize that literature is more effective than either history or philosophy in arousing the readers to virtue. And herein lies the raison d'etre of all literature lovers and this webinar. This paper deals with Jhumpa Lahiri's magnum opus, The Lowland. The novel inexplicably makes a strong statement regarding the significance of integration in one's respective society. The Lowland stands out for the lessons one can learn, choices in life of the three main characters named Dayan, Subhash and Gauri Mitra. This satisfaction and the ability to negotiate peacefully leads to disintegration and extremism. Terrorism traced to the 20th century has become one of the greatest threats in our society. These chasms in society to be addressed continuously and in text. In The Lowland, Jhumpa Lahiri has addressed social disharmony at the grassroots level. In this diasporic novel, Alienation, which a reader expects to find diaspora, is actually present in the native land. Lahiri contrasts the disharmony in native Calcutta to the peaceful assimilation in the diaspora, namely America. The two main characters, who are brothers, Udayan and Subhash, have a similar upbringing in the lowlands of Polygonj in Calcutta. But one embraces a path of destruction and violence, while the other takes a peaceful path towards construction and assimilation. Udayan is an idealist, but he embraces the forbidden path. Unable to assimilate with unjust society, some social and political policies, he accepts the Naxalite ideology. The violent path chosen by Udayan has disastrous consequences. Udayan is killed while hiding in the marshes of the land, and he leaves behind a bereaved family. Violence leads to anarchy. His dissimulation caused him to die a traitor's death in the lowland marshes. Subhash, on the other hand, is an academician. He completes his doctorate in the United States. He carries out Udayan's incomplete family responsibilities. He marries Udayan's pregnant widow Gauri and takes her to America. Subhash survives even Gauri's apathy towards him. He survives their loveless marriage. Identifying with oneself, things around you, and with otherness requires a personality possessed by few. Subhash has always been able to identify with his family, with his native land, his roots, and his otherness in diaspora. Due to his inborn resilience, he is able to identify with reality in a foreign country. It is commendable when he is able to understand the psychological wounds of Bella and Gauri, both of whom are victims of their own hyphenated existences, undecided loyalties, and crushed dreams. The close of the novel brings us back to Udayan's death, when Udayan regrets the life he has embraced and the murder he committed. Gauri, Udayan's widow, is an intellectual, but she is unable to develop and refine her motherly instincts towards her daughter Bella or her husband Subhash. She detaches herself from her husband and her daughter. Gauri also has the weight of her all revolutionary violence. Every individual needs to survive in the face of different forces, influences, and polarity, whether in home or in an alien soil. Hegemonic forces are always prevalent in all facades and in all environments. The answer to survival is creating an identity by identity in a native land or in international terrorism has not gone overnight. Instead of entering into a dialogue, the discontented individuals self-justify themselves by enforcing lawlessness. The world
Please
war and
wrap
the
up, Dr.
Holocaust.
Lenora. Dr. Lenora,
The
please
Lowland,
wrap up.
sure. The Lowland is a novel which advocates non-violence. In a country where the Mahatma taught us the righteous path of satyagraha and non-violence, Jhumpa Lahiri, with great sophistication and aplomb, takes our heritage to the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lenora. And we know that when we are talking about disaster and resilience, Indian English literature is never far behind to respond in this sector. We have our second presentation today. We will take up the question answers, if any, later on after completion of all the papers. All right. And now we have with us Chitralekha Bishwas, PhD scholar of Jadavpur University. She will talk on everyday life in the empire, representation of the servant class in flora and steel.
Thank you, sir. So, everyday life, my topic is everyday life in the empire, representation of the servant class in flora and steel. So, everyday life in the empire entails the presence of native servants in colonial houses. Literary works written by memsahibs residing in India due to their marriage to English soldiers or civil servants make constant reference, though very briefly, about the role of domestic servants in their lives. A properly managed house with a well-disciplined servant is a testimony of imperial success. Flora and Steele, 1847 to 1921, was a memsahib who lived in India for 22 years. In her advice manual, The Complete Indian Housekeeper and Cook, 1907, she states that housekeeping in India, when once the first trenches has worn off, is a far easier task in many ways than it is in England. Such manuals recreate the domestic space as an environment of power and authority that the memsahibs are able to rule and manage efficiently. For centuries, the master-servant relationship has been a challenging one, characterized by dips and power struggle. While interacting with their servants, the memsahib saw them as potential mediators of the colonial world, since the possibility of knowing the Orient through one's own experience was limited and restrained. Unable to understand the intricacies of Indian caste system, its religious prejudices, or gender concerns, memsahibs often misinterpreted their domestic helps. Although affording servant was not a luxury, it was a sort of necessary and an unavoidable evil which all Europeans had to bear up with. Representing servants within the interior of colonial home was fraught with tension and problem. Hence, while on one hand the proficiency and skill of native servants were acclaimed and admired, on the other hand, They are shown to suffer, if not reserve torture, neglect, and racial hatred as a means of keeping them in their place. This ambivalence regarding the servant class is critically debated in the text of Flora Steele. She mentioned instances of servants beating in her autobiography, The Garden of Fidelity, 1929, but she is also seen praising the help given by her ayah firstly during her stay in India. This blending of revulsion and appreciation towards the servant class makes the narratives of Steele interesting to read. The servant characters always remain in the periphery of the narrative. Their behavior, attitude, or their activities are never represented in the first person but are always filtered through the viewpoint of the author or some other character. In order to recreate the life of this always absent labor class, a detailed understanding of the situation is necessary. In a few of Steele's texts, servants are present who are shown to be following and maintaining the prescribed rules of class and hierarchy. An in-depth assessment of the servant class, such as Iman Khan, Hiranand, Dharam Singh, facilitates an understanding of the reality of their lives. In this text, Steele places lowly poor old servant characters at the center of a narrative to expose the social, cultural, and imperial prejudices prevalent in the society. In the short story For the Faith from the collection Flower of Forgiveness, 1894, revolves around the India's religious ideas, age-old customs, and Western skepticism regarding the superstitious and passive Eastern cultural models. The narrative begins with a reunion between an old servant, Dharam Singh, and his long-served master, Soni Baba. The servant takes up the charge of a caregiver when the Shaib falls severely ill. The Shaib, with the kind help of the servant and by taking his handmade medicine, slowly recovers. But unfortunately, Dharam Singh falls ill with the same fever, and the powder he had used for the Shaib does not work in case, and he dies. The erstwhile Sikh soldiers' religious sentimentality or belief in native medicine is ridiculed by the civilized and educated English people in the story. Throughout the text, it is Dharam Singh who takes care of the Shai, but in the end, he has a doomed future. The story underscores how, even though the master failed to perform his responsibility towards the servant, Dharam Singh performs all his duties towards his master and emerges as a winner even in death. The next short story, Hiranand from the collection Flower of Forgiveness, 1894, discusses in detail about the plight of a gardener and his untimely death at the end. The master on the most occasion is kind to him and his daughter Draupadi. Being an old man, he is not loved by his young wife, who secretly kept lovers. But the scenario changes completely when the Shah has returned to England due to his ill health. On his return, after 6 months, he is shocked to learn that the gardener Hiranand has been hanged for murdering his young wife. So we see that a servant who fulfills all his duties towards his master is not saved by him in the end. The text remains ambivalent in dealing with the death of the servant, but in the end, we see the Shahib questioning the sanctity of the British legal system. The thought process of the Shahib shows that he gives human status to the servant, which is absent in other texts. In my next text, Iman Khan from Solidarity from the short story collection Mercy of the Lord, 1914, he has served the royalty for in the previous years and now serving his late master's Eurasian family. So he's fond of the children and he takes special care of eldest daughter Elfina Norma, and also arranges her marriage with a Shahid. But the couple
Please
is
sum up.
living.
Please
Hello.
sum up. Please sum up.
Yeah. Just a second. So the narrative, we see that the character of Iman acquires relevance only as far as essential in bringing the narrative to a happy close. But once that purpose has been fulfilled, the author falls silent and nothing more is said about him. So, to conclude, we see that the servants are shown as an integral part of the domestic life, sharing confidential as well as reciprocal relationship with the master. But we see that, but despite this familiarity, there is a lingering sense of inequality and difference to be found in all the three stories. Steele uses an atmosphere of illusion and ambivalence to camouflage the real British attitude towards the servant class. She may give them a limited voice and identity, but in the end is unable to do justice to them. It seems that the prevailing attitude is that the servant should learn to wait and labor for the master class with a clear understanding of their eventual fate. Thank you.
Thank you, Chitralekha. So we had a paper on Flora and Steele, who was regarded by the scholars, termed by the scholars as female Kipling. For over 2 decades in British India, she had so much works on Indian society and so much comments on Indian society actually. So we had a paper on Flora and Steele, and now we will proceed to our third paper that will be delivered by A.L. Monica C., a research scholar of Christ University, deemed to be University of Bengaluru, and her topic is Instagram's graphic medicine, documenting the pandemic through hashtags. So living in the era of hashtags, we have a paper on hashtags. I invite A.L. Monica to present her paper.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for the introduction. Instagram, many of us will be having a question like, is a social media platform doing in an academic conference like this? Is it relevant, or is it even relevant as a narrative of resilience? I have tried to answer these questions in my paper in detail, but here I would like to put forth two of my arguments that I think will make this platform a relevant and an essential area of study. The data of my study are comics taken from the platform Instagram using hashtag search mechanism. I use the hashtags pandemic comics, COVID comic, and graphic medicine. I have taken 10 posts from each search results from the top category of the platform. Instagram has two search results, the top and the recent. The recent category displays posts that have been using this particular hashtag, and it is updated every second of the day. Whereas the top category displays posts that have used a hashtag and have acquired maximum audience engagement through likes, shares, saves, and comments. The relevance of hashtag and its social importance has been addressed by Diana Dobrin in her research, and she says that hashtags, I quote, are a symbolic dimension that makes people see it as a representation of a shared set of norms and conventions around a particular moment, I unquote. Instagram has over 500 million users every day. It will be mundane to assume that so much of people barged into this platform only for entertainment and communication purpose. I would like to state it is more than that. The two of my arguments, the first one is that Instagram comics, they document every phase of a life of an individual and every step of a social movement. And by such documentation, they become a digital narrative. In my paper, I have many comics that report. One example is the comics on Wuhan, where the coronavirus outbreak took place, and the comic is depicted in a way where where it showcases the mayhem of the press that have been present during the news about the outbreak and in the hospital premise. And there are comics about medical workers, about student doctors and student nurses who are struggling to compensate between between their studies as well as being a frontline warrior of the pandemic. And there are comics about social movements like do-gooders, which addresses the LGBTQ issue, where how they struggled during the pandemic. And my second argument I would like to put forth is that Instagram comics, they encompass an essence of graphic medicine in a digital platform. It depicts the anxiety faced during the comic. There are comics that have depicted the anxiety, stress, depression that have caused due to loneliness, and they also serve as a narrative that helps in associating towards one another. And there is a very interesting comic that says, when will this pandemic end? How will I wish I can show them, but I couldn't show them. When will all this mundane routine of wearing a mask, going to the office alone, and not having any social gathering together, when will this all end? So these comics depict stress, depression, loneliness, even symptoms of PTSD and trauma. Though these posts are individual narrations, they become a narrative of healing through the act of liking, sharing, and commenting. For only when we adhere to a particular post, or only when we agree or associate ourselves with a post, we try to engage in it. These Instagram comics, by providing a narration of association, comfort, and positivity, they become a narrative of healing. So I would like to conclude my presentation putting forth one strong argument that these two qualities of Instagram comics makes them a far more approachable narrative of resilience and healing that have helped tons and tons of people during pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Actually, in this age of Instagram, WhatsApp, and Facebook, We may like them, dislike them, but we can never neglect them. They have become so much engaged with our existence. So we pass on to the next paper. It's actually a joint paper by Miss Benazir Banu MS, who is a research scholar, and Dr. Evangeline Priscilla B., an assistant professor, both from Vellore Institute of Technology. So from our Instagram, from social media, we are now jumping to a horror novel, which is actually very much new. It's published in 2019. So the topic is an understanding of the cosmogenesis of survival during an epidemic, from the novel Wilder Girls by Rory Power. Rory Power, the crime fiction writer. So please start your paper.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to present my paper. The novel Wilder Girls is Rory Power's debut novel. It takes place in an island called Mainland in an all-girls boarding school called Raxter. When the novel begins, like for 18 months, it's with 100 students with one headmistress and a teacher who are living in quarantine for 18 months due to a disease called tox. Tox is a widespread disease which first started spreading through plants, then to animals, and then to the residents of the island. This disease would give two heartbeats, scale in their hands, flares, which leads up to their death. So through this kind of setting, this paper aims to understand the cosmogenesis of survival during an epidemic from the novel Wilder Girls by Rory Power, and the way in which I try to achieve my aim is to looking at certain elements such as denial, alienation, characteristic development, power, hope, and trust. When we talk about the history of pandemic, it starts from Canterbury Tales by Chaucer, which was written during the plague year, and many more since then. There is a separate genre on pandemic literature because it portrays about the fear of loss of control by human beings, and pandemic literature helps people to learn from the past and prepare for the future. In that way, a general reaction during pandemic is that of a denial, like thinking that there is nothing wrong, there is no emergency that's going on, and that sluggish reaction leads to major disaster. And this kind of reaction also takes place in Wilder Girls, where the main character says that during the first 2 months of the talks, nobody took it seriously as the teachers were teaching at the board with blood on their clothes, and that kind of reaction leads to many deaths in the novel. And the second demarcation of the theme denial is about the attempt to subject with the impending disaster, where denial becomes a coping mechanism. It's like people are so immune to their fellow classmates dying, they don't react anymore. When one student goes missing, they're just so used to her being gone. So denial becomes a coping mechanism for their existence. And the second predominant theme would be that of alienation. Alienation has two demarcation. One is isolation, the other one is solitude. Isolation takes place when people are forced to live alone, such as quarantine, where the girls are living not in a normal lifestyle, the education is affected, the social relationship is affected, and this kind of isolation leads towards solitude, where solitude refers to the act of living alone by choice. They don't care about anything anymore. They're detached from everything. And a psychological study on quarantine on children says that a quarantine might lead to psychological distress such as a PTSD, acute stress disorder, adjustment disorder, etc. The author is trying to resolve this kind of alienation and denial by incorporating queer representation, where the girls have a purpose in their life. They care for each other. There is love, there is hope for the first time in their life. And as an LGBTQ trope, which is a part of a young adult novel, the author is also trying to break certain stereotypes. The first stereotypes is all the main characters and the entire novel revolves around girls. They're not dependent on men. They have to take care of each other. These girls are not damsel in distress waiting for somebody to save. Instead, they have to save each other from this tox disease. And the second stereotype is the cliche idea of the girls against girls. That girls don't go well with each other. They always fight, something like that. In this novel, the girls do fight, but that is for the ration because there is no enough food that's available for them in the island. And even if they are fighting one character against another character, it is to save themselves from danger. Majority of the relationship dynamic portrays that the characteristics are always there for each other, not just as part of survival, but also as part of their friendship. It also emphasizes on the length that human beings would go to protect the people they love despite of the pandemic. Every character is grey in this novel, and nobody could say that there is one single villain. Although some readers could say that the climate change is the villain, because due to the climate change, the ice got melted, which created a parasite which was spread
Please
to the.
conclude.
Yes, the government authority do know that something like the disease, the talks is going on, but still they were more interested in experimenting the disease rather than protecting the people. So, not taking appropriate action during the appropriate time could be the true villain of the novel. And the characters in the novel is trying to evaluate that by taking appropriate action with unerring timing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Benazir Banu. And now we proceed to the next paper by Subhasri Karanjai. Our topic is Literature as Savior, Reading the Holocaust and Epidemic Narrative. So Subhasri will talk on a subject which has endless discussion and which has possibilities of endless discussion. I will again want to request you that please sum up your talk within 4 to 5 minutes. Subhasri.
Thank you, Amitabh. Good afternoon, all. Am I audible?
Yes, you are absolutely audible. Proceed with
Thank you. On the eve of the last day of 2020, most of us took the habitual walk down the memory lane to shudder at the thought of what COVID has made of our lives. That is the norm of post-apocalyptic phase. While some miseries that are recorded as facts, like death tolls and infected human populations, starving populace, and unemployment, most efforts are undocumented but equally pathetic. Pandemic has been referred to as mass murderer, and this term is intriguing enough to suggest that it conceals a bigger truth. Pandemic has escaped and blooded human minds more than human bodies. The undocumented but often spoken of effect of COVID on humanity is an unprecedented madness, a pandemonium we are living in. Articulations on the relationship between pandemic and literature from infinite angles have been made in last few months like never before. Any kind of discussion on this would be repetitive and banal. But at the onset of a new year, this might be an opportunity to share personal journeys through literature, and especially the categorically quote-unquote dark narratives to hang on in the times of densest darkness. Reading habits of humanity at large explains the precarious nature of the crisis we are living in. Human suffering is not new. It is always already there. Neither is the pandemic any first happening in this world. Every century has encountered such devastating contagious killers. We have heard Dr. Shen already. Then what is the new? Nothing but the evolution of the suffering with that of the virus in relation to the time we are living in. That is what Catherine Malabou suggested in her recent online talk at Boy lecture series organized by University of North Bengal, Department of English. There is a quote-unquote epigenesis of the virus and humanity's reaction to it. It is gradually evolving and not preformed. We are neither out of the process yet, and nor be sure that what turn COVID will take in the next moment, and when and how will it finally end. So our strategies, the strategies to deal with it and live are in a constant process of evolution. That is the resilience. If reading literature has helped a section of humanity to hang on, that has also projected an evolution, beginning with pick up what you come by reading to a methodical reading of a group of literature, which is designated quite paradoxically, quote unquote, dark narratives. Hemmed in a series of tragedies in personal, social, political, racial, we cannot forget the heartbreaking death of George Floyd, economic, and all sorts of spaces, humanity quite naturally sought for escape from the immediate, bitter reality it was plunged in. Every moment seemed intolerably suffocating with panic, hysteria, and stigma associated with COVID. The post-truth age baffles us all the more in such times, and an anchor is hard to find. How distrust and mindless fears have taken over the globe, and all are not optimists like Zizek. Mind sought for some trust and empathy. Humanity looked for lifeguards and some dystopian narratives to explain that this is not the worst. Of course, this is not in the case of whole reading populace. Some enjoyed fantasy literature and Alice in Wonderland to escape the reality. Others might have had a hard time with reading, though they are avid readers. That is how epigenesis works against the preformed. Albert Camus' The Plague came to the top of the most reading list in the last few months. Being a second-time reader of this classic piece in these times, I can say that a compassionate reflection of the pit of human suffering, the dilemmas and agonizing pains has been a comfort. There is someone who has known it better. I'm not alone. The unanticipated eruption of the quote unknown unknown, as explained by Mark Honigsbaum in his recent book, The Pandemic Century, has left the sensitive folk not in isolation to enjoy me times, but anxious, lonely, nothing to do times. And that is both frightening and destructive. Camus resurrected to be a lover in these times of dissolving trust and warmth in an insanely self-centered world. The experience of indelible crisis demanded the helping hands of those states that would embolden us to move ahead and not give up. Many turn to tough and frightening stories to be grateful that they do not have to endure the worst. The Holocaust narratives with records of devastating evils and crude suffering of humanity could show us that there were such ills which today we cannot think of, and our forefathers have won over them to give us a better present. What power did Viktor Frankl, he's the author of Man's Search for Meaning, have to endure all those inhuman tortures and separation from family and kins in an age of no mobile phones? How could they combat death and destruction and still search for a meaning of life? Every crisis brings in a bag full of existential questions, and we seem to lose ground. This pandemic has brought its own curse on those minds whose bodies were otherwise unaffected by the virus. At times, we do admit our easy access to information has aggravated the trouble. But a walk down the lanes of Christine Hanna's Germany and that of Marcus Zusak did feel like charging ourselves in mind and body to fight the worst. The sacrifices made by men, women, and children, the toll of war on myriad of lives, the sleepless nights of the Jews, the villains becoming more villainous and heroes emerging out of the common folk, all seem so enticing in these times of distress. These books give us the silver lining to hang on. They give us windows to look for hopes of survival. They gift us the will and power to fight all odds. If anything exists that humanity can cope with bravery, it is pain. The world breaks everyone, and afterwards, many are strong at the broken places. So said Ernest Hemingway. And the way from this breaking to the living is made possible by literature, for it is as sacred as education. Educate the mind to endure the pain. Thank you.
Thank you, Subhasri. Though I am bulldozing the papers with possibilities, but I am helpless. So our next presenter is Dr. Jasdeep Singh, Associate Professor, Department of English, Graphic Era, Hill University, Dehradun. And the topic is Resilience and Resistance, Exploring the Core Concerns of Rusdian Fiction. So now we will proceed to Salman Rusdi.
Amitabh, Mr. Yashdeep, I think he is having some trouble with his network issue. He can't enter the meeting.
Okay.
I have sent him the link once again in WhatsApp group. So please proceed with the next presenter.
Okay. I would like to invite Dr. Geeta Goel, Associate Professor of English, RKSD PG College, Kaithal, and the topic is Power of Resilience in Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. Dr. Goel.
Hello.
Yes, you are audible.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My topic
Hello,
is,
I have actually joined. Hello. I have joined, ma'am. I have already joined. I even sent a message.
No, it's fine. You please wait now.
Okay.
Please wait after the paper of Dr. Goel. You will.
All right, sir. All right.
Dr. Geeta
thank you
Goel.
very much. Power of Resilience in Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea is my topic. So here I start. Hemingway's central character in The Old Man and the Sea is an ordinary Cuban fisherman with extraordinary qualities. Through his character, the author wants to show the power of an ordinary man, what he can do, and how much he is capable of. Despite being a poor ordinary fisherman who has been unsuccessful in catching a fish for the last 84 days, Santiago dreams big and strives hard to fulfill it with all his strength and sincerity. His high aspiration to catch a big marlin, his dauntless courage in fights with sharks, and finally the skeleton of the fish he brings back make the reader think what Hemingway wants to project through this strange old man. Does he want to bring out man's defeat in continuous struggle with the vast force of nature? or highlight Santiago's undeterred courage in the face of difficulties and the stoic acceptance of failure.
Dr. Goel, you are not audible anymore. Dr. Geeta Goel.
And measure it to see by how much it is record breaking. Is Santiago defeated? Of course, he gains nothing, as whatever he catches is eaten away by sharks, and the skeleton of the marlin he brings back has no market value. But he is not broken and achieves dignity by putting up a brave fight till the end. He sets out to prove that mere destruction is not defeat, that man is a permanent fighter. And I quote from the novel that man is not made for defeat. So, all the qualities which he sees in a great fish, beauty, nobility, courage, endurance, are the qualities which he values most and he himself would like to confirm. At the end, he dreams of African loins he has seen in his younger days, which symbolize new adventure, new hopes, and new experiences. Morally, he proves to be an ideal fighter, a code hero who never surrenders and resists defeat with courage and endurance. And I quote again from the text, "You didn't kill the fish only to keep alive or to sell for the food. You killed him for the pride and because you are a fisherman." Unquote. To conclude, Santiago is heroic even in his bad luck. He is ordinary man capable of extraordinary dignity and heroism. Despair, conflict, and doubts entrap him, but he still goes on unfailingly. For him, every day is a new day, and what really matters is the untiring effort. The intensity of his struggle, sincerity of his effort, and degree of his courage raises him in the eyes of the readers. Thus, the story shows that it is not the victory or the defeat that matters, it is the struggle and the power of resilience that makes a man undefeated even in his defeat. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Geeta Goel. And now we will listen to Dr. Jasdeep Singh and from Graphicera Hill University, Dehradun. His topic is Resilience and Resistance, Exploring the Core Concerns of Rusdian Fiction. Dr.
Hello, good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope I'm audible to all of you.
Yes, yes, you proceed.
Okay, sir. I have chosen the topic resilience and resistance, and it is with respect to Rushdian fiction, the fiction by Salman Rushdie. Now, whenever we read Salman Rushdie, what we find is that he is someone who has always stood for certain principles, and he has ample resilience. We should not forget that a fatwa was issued against him, and he has always resisted his freedom of speech, and he stands for this freedom of speech and freedom of thought in the global context. And in spite of several impediments that have come in his way, he has always stood with resilience for his principles and his convictions. So I will be reading my abstract first of all. Individual human security and liberty is often threatened by ideological supporters of fundamentalism, bigotry, racism, fanaticism, and also by state-sponsored repression of free speech and free thinking. Salman Rushdie has dedicated his entire life and literary pursuits to create a global awareness regarding the indispensability of freedom of speech through thought and expression for the creation of a world order where individual rights and human liberty is religiously revered. He has always challenged, mocked it, and resisted every such maneuver to subdue human liberties. particularly by means of his literary masterpieces such as Midnight's Children, Shame, Harun and the Sea of Stories, The Moor's Last Sigh, The Ground Beneath Her Feet, and Shalimar the Clown. This paper aims at exploring the novels of Salman Rushdie and tracing his perspectives associated with individual liberties through a close reading and critical analysis of these books. It would intend to testify the fact that books can indeed be effective tools of confronting the agencies of repression and fear by being champions of human resilience. So I will just read a passage of my opening of my paper and then I will just sum it up because of paucity of time. In the essay Imaginary Homelands, a collection of essays by Salman Rushdie, this Booker-winning author makes an illuminating revelation that redescribing a world is the necessary first step towards changing it. Elaborating upon the relevance of alternative versions and perceptions for safeguarding human rights and basic human liberties, Rushdie further asserts in the same essay, writers and politicians are natural rivals. Both groups try to make the world in their own images. They fight for the same territory. And the novel is one way of denying the official politicians' version of truth. Subverting the official versions and bringing into question any absolute truth or finality of outlook, Salman Rushdie tries through his literary works to put forth individual perspectives to contest with the official perspectives, which are often endorsed by hegemonic authorities. Now, what we find in his books, for example, in Midnight's Children, he has very, with a lot of zeal, he has stood against the emergency that was imposed by the government. In a very similar way, he has spoken freely against the autocratic regime of Ziaul Haq in Pakistan. In Harun and the Sea of Stories, through a children's story, he has spoken about the issues of liberty of speech. He has fictionalized a land of Gapwalas and Chuppis, and through this narrative, he has tried to assert how important speech is. And all those people, whether they are politicians or they are terrorists or they are autocratic forces, anyone or anything that tries to silence the speech and thought needs to be confronted, and people need to somewhere ingrain this resilience within themselves so that in such moments of crisis they should be able to overpower. Because there is paucity of time, so I will just be reading the concluding paragraph of my paper. Through his novels and other literary works, Salman Rushdie has substantially contributed to the creation of an awakening that umbilical cord of human security is rooted in free speech, and hence we need to guard these liberties vigilantly. The challenges to human liberties have attained new dimensions in the present times, and it therefore becomes incumbent upon scholars and writers worldwide to vehemently strengthen the resilience of human liberties, human rights, and human dignity, following the footsteps of Salman Rushdie. Resistance of all such authoritarian agencies that makes attempt to strangulate individual liberty of thought and expression has been the core guiding principle running as undercurrent all through the entire body of literary works by Rushdie. It is therefore natural that all his fictional works have earnestly strived to make the real world more resilient to the threats posed by autocratic regimes and despotic powers across the globe. Because there is paucity of time, so I have just summed it up. Thank you very much. It was a very fruitful session for me. All the speakers have been very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jasdev Singh. Our listeners may have some questions or concerns, so I will request them to be with us till the end. After all the papers are presented, we will take up the questions, if any. So our next paper is Resilience and Survival, a study of women's experience of genocide, which will be presented by Noora Ashraf, research scholar, FLU, Hyderabad.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
So, good afternoon, everybody. My topic is Resilience and Survival, a study of women's experience of genocide. So, I examine women's experience of genocide and how they are subjected to twofold violence. I also probe into their survival strategies and resilience during and post genocide. For that, I analyze a few plays of genocide like Bilad al Sudan by Juliet Giles, Silhaute by Carlo Gebler, IDP by Vincent Pinnock, and The Body of a Woman is a Battlefield in the Bosnian War by Matej Wisniewicz. The former three plays are based on the ongoing genocide in Darfur. Bilad al Sudan is a play about two females, Mariam and Halima, from different clans at a refugee camp in Darfur who have two different experiences to recount. Silhaute tells the story of a Darfuri rape victim, Mariam, and her Irish nurse, Rebecca. IDP is about a mother, Mariam, who refuses to acknowledge the existence of her daughter, Idris. The Body of a Woman as a Battlefield in the Bosnian War is based on the Bosnian War and genocide. It deals with the rapport between two women. Kate, an American psychologist working in Bosnia with excavation of mass graves, and Dora, a rape victim who is mute. So, genocides and other such mass events of violence are a great source to study human behavior. During a genocide, people from the victim community are subjected to all kinds of violence, but women are subjected to twofold violence. In addition to the usual killings and beatings, which are similar for the men and women are subjected to sexual violence also. This makes them undergo twofold violence. Rape and other sexual abuse become the way how women experience genocides. As women are considered to be bearers of the future generation of a community, they are targeted. Sexual violence is used as a tool to achieve genocide. During the Bosnian genocide, Serb troops engaged in opportunistic rapes and set up detention centers to gang rape women of all ages when moving from Croatian Muslim villages. They raped the women until they became pregnant and held them as captives till the pregnancy is far too advanced for abortions. The plays of genocide stress on this notion of sexual violence as a tool to achieve genocide. In Silhaute, Mariam recounts her experience to Rebecca and says, "They get down then, the three of them, and you know what these devils do to young girls. We are black, we are right, and they eat us. The other two take all my clothes and push me down." In another play, IDP, Idris, the daughter says, "They forced my mother to watch as they took turns to rape me." The resilience process of women during and post-genocide include all kinds of measures. When writing about the contribution of the Jewish women in the Nazi Germany, Ringelblum argued that women showed a remarkable ability to adjust to the changing circumstances, the collapse of civil society, established gender relations, and traditional family structures. So, resilient measures of women during and post-genocide include: so first measure, pragmatism. Women were often practical during a genocide than men. Male members of a community or nation were more invested in feelings for their own land and community, making it impossible for them to leave their land. But female members showcase their pragmatic and realistic sides during a genocide. In the scenario of the Holocaust, women take only signs of Nazism seriously and treat themselves for all kinds of work useful abroad and mentally prepared to leave the country, thinking it was better to leave than face discrimination in their own land. But men were hoping to continue their jobs and professions. Women migrated from the havoc-hit land of theirs to other safer havens in the hopes of filling their life anew. Bilad al Sudan portrays this difference of emotion in men and women and shows how women stayed practical during a genocide. Halima from the play recounts, "When the killings was over, father told me and Aunt Fatima to run for our lives. He refused to come with us. He wanted to stay and bury the dead in our homeland." Motherhood. When a genocide ends, most times women become lone survivors of their family. When left alone, questioning the purpose of their life, motherhood and attending to the needs of other surviving members of the family, even if distant, aid them in their process of resilience. Motherhood becomes the powerful mode of resilience. This process of resilience through motherhood and nurturing to other family members is also shown in the plays. Mariam in Bilada Sudan clings to the baby she got from the street. She says, "I gather my precious child in my arms and turn my back. He's not really my child, but he does not really know that. I found him on a dirt road." In the same play, another character, Halima, hates to be with children, but towards the end, when Mariam dies, Halima picks up Mariam's son and says, "In life and always it."
Please conclude. Please
Yeah.
conclude.
So women's resilient process included all kind of measures, but including indulging in practical decisions, motherhood, staying silent, and coming together for each other are the most important measures which helped them stay resilient during and post genocide. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nura Ashraf. And we pass on to the next paper by Pansy Evangeline Victor, research scholar in English, St. Joseph's College of Arts and Science for Women, Hosur, and Dr. K. Charles Godwin, assistant professor in English, CMS Jain University, Bengaluru. It's a joint paper and it's entitled An Analyzation of Integrity and Cohesion with Nature through the selected poems of Nabokamata Barua and Hem Barua. So please proceed with your paper. Pansy Evangeline Victor. I think she is not present. Pansy Evangeline Victor.
Hello, good afternoon, sir.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes, you are audible.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, please proceed.
My title of the poem of the article is An Analyzation of Integrity and Cohesion with Nature through the selected poems of Nabakamta Barua and Hem Baru. So these two poets are Assamese poet. These poets, they brought fame to their state. So this article, the paper interprets the immensity of nature and the interrelationship between nature and man. The poems were translated by Nibajyoti Sharma and Krishna Dulal Barua. So this, the first poem I have dealt is with the silt, and the second one is a love lyric, and the third one is Mamata's letter. So the silt, says that nature sacrifices and shows its concern for the human world. Today, in turn, we can see where humanity seems to grab nature and interferes beyond limits, leading to unexpected disasters. So this poem seems to be a request to the human world. So the poet, he voices he describes as if he voices the lines through nature, where clouds declares rainfall to pour and pour until everything is over. So here everything is the disaster human beings create over nature. And here we can see in this poetry, the poet, along with his family members, he goes to cremate his grandfather's bones in the river. So after everything is over, so the poet says that it is polluted. The river is polluted. So he finishes everything and he comes back, and the poem, it goes by and it says, "Dear travelers always on the street." So he means that these uh, uh, kind of things which is done, he says that the nature, it accepts how the people do everything with their rituals and so and so. So here he says where the nature, it pleads, it places a request to the people, where he says, "Dear travelers always on the street, leave a sigh or two, let the shallow water ebb away the shell of the dead spider, let our silt fertilize both banks of the river." So here we can see that nature can demolish and it can create. It can get demolished by the rituals and everything the human nature does to create disaster. So it can create as well. So this poetry, it is a plead for the human world to conserve and restore the bygone ecological world and to commit action to build a green globe. So next, the two poems, it talks about the ambience of the nature. It talks about the power to exhibit power and grandeur of nature. So here, as we see, poetry always, it exhibits the unreal to real and unseen to seen. The ambience around this poet is seem to be dark with the light ray of light, where he writes a letter to his daughter. So here he says, where it is chill, breezy, and dark. He is writing his poem with a ray of candlelight. And the lines, if you see every line, it shows the grandeur and the glory of nature. The poet provides a dramatic intensity and gives a gift of imagination to the poem. The poet portrays the richness of nature around him. It portrays a symbiotic relationship between humans and nature. He describes the beauty of foggy winter morning, the freshness of nature both morning, noon, and with the breezy, foggy times. So he says about the smell of fragrance of flowers, and which connects to the emotions of human mind, where cloudy symbolizes the gloomy state of mind, where he compares slender fingers to numerous moons, etc. So so to conclude, he says these poems, it shows the power of nature and the glory of nature. It shows that poetry is a philosophy that teaches one to analyze and understand one's relationship with the green world and all the surviving beings. The human world is called to embrace nature, to banish the death's gate gushing today with disaster, and to find an everlasting way to save and sustain the earth. The above poems stresses the human world to understand its role in the planet and also to analyze the practices which is the root cause of unsustainability. Its plead is to conserve and restore the bygone ecological world. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Pansy. Now, our next speaker is Shubhrojit Samanto, student PG first semester, Department of Mass Communications of University of North Bengal. He will deliver his lecture on psychological horror in the silence of the lambs and red dragon. I invite Shubhrojit. Yes.
Very good afternoon to everyone present. I thank the organizers of the webinar for giving me the opportunity to present my paper. My research article is entitled Psychological Horror in the Silence of the Lambs and the Red Dragon. Today, the subject of horror films has assumed a different dimension. Any horror film like The Silence of the Lambs and Red Dragon creates an impact on the psychology of the audience by its visual impact, mainly due to a conflation of various genres like the horror film, crime, thriller, mystery, neo-noir, and psychological horror. A horror story or film portrays external conflict, largely the outcome of a monster or paranormal entity as an antagonist, attacking a normal world of refined, stable, normal people. But when we talk about films depicting psychological horror, we largely tend to look at it as it focuses on the main character's inner conflict, and the fear comes from an attack on the ego. The psychology of fear as some powerful feeling raises some fundamental questions about the state of our society. For example, when we observe a man turning into a criminal and becoming a menace to us, then we are bound to question the circumstances that made him or her a criminal. Such films are a commentary as to how humans react when such things happen. Yet we are assured of our status and relieved as detective agencies assure us of our survival. In other words, these films draw a boundary between our stable existence within a niche and the criminal as such. Our safety is assured. In the aesthetics and psychology behind horror films, Michelle Park at Long Island University has attempted to define fear as a negative emotion. But at the same time, fear can be a pleasurable experience as we enjoy our adrenaline rush in horror films. Such films help us to escape from the pressures of reality. We watch scary movies because they help us to release our anxiety and fears deep inside our conscious. Appeal of such movies may be explained by Aristotle's notion of catharsis, which helps us to purge our feelings of aggression. Sigmund Freud feels that the sense of horror comes from the uncanny, emergence of images and thoughts of the primitive ID. The aim of horror films is to highlight our subconscious fears, desires, urges, and primeval archetypes that lie buried deep in our collective unconscious. In both the films, Dr. Hannibal Lecter depicts the psychology of a highly intelligent mind. Besides being a psychopath, Hannibal loves pain, loves to inflict pain. He is behind bars, but he passionately insinuates that he can get into the mind of Clarice Sterling. He has great fury and passion, but he projects himself as a humane doctor who is surpassingly more intelligent than anyone. He is, in other words, an avant-garde criminal in both the films. The psychological intricacies explored by The Silence of the Lambs bears on Lecter's unique observation that, I quote, "The great malignant criminals are icons because they say things which normal people are not allowed to say." The uncanny has been the concern of actors, filmmakers, and novelists today. The film, A Nightmare on Elm Street, haunts us when we watch Johnny Depp falling asleep and getting swallowed alive by his bed. None other than Soren Kierkegaard, in his Fear and Trembling, has opined that Shakespeare, as a poet and dramatist, has given expression through his power of words to utter all the grim secret of others at the cost of a little secret he himself cannot utter. This sense of inner turmoil has been displayed in the psyche of the brilliant psychiatrist Dr. Hannibal Lecter in both the films, The Silence of the Lambs and The Red Dragon. Further, both the films explore how a mass murderer has to be traced by another of its kind. The slaughter of the innocents has nudged the audience to look profoundly into their own psyche. In this paper, therefore, I have attempted to explain how the depths of the human mind harbors uncanny ideas and feelings of guilt, depression, violence, and hatred, no matter how good or evil, brilliant or mundane they are, expressing themselves in acts of murder. Psychological horror in the films above, therefore, may be seen as subjects of research. Thank you.
Thank you, Shubhrojit. So, from psychological horror to the risk of extinction, we have now the paper of Afropal, Research Scholar, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Jodhpur, and the topic is a Species at Risk, reading Barbara Kingsolver's selected works as anthropocentric extinction narratives.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, the organizers, for giving me an opportunity to present my paper. I want to make a little bit of slide presentation. Is the sir?
Yes, it's all right.
Thank you very much. My paper is on Barbara Kingsolver's Anthropocenic Extinction Narratives. Kingsolver is a contemporary writer. She is a freelance journalist, trained biologist, and an environmental activist. Research shows that she is one of those most promising voices after Rachel Carson while writing scientific truths and poetics in her works. So, without delaying, I should start reading the paper. I have the text written with me. Humans have become the root cause of every environmental change in the present geological era, causing global species extinction, climate shifts, and reshaping the terrestrial biosphere. Atmospheric chemist Paul Cruzen and ecological trauma have termed this epoch the Anthropocene. Unlike the previous geological epochs, it is an era marked with climatological and physical disruptions of the Earth's environment. I have the quote from the Nature, written by Paul Cruzen. So, the whole thing, I'm just emphasizing that the term Anthropocene present in many ways human-dominated geological epoch. So all the environmental and global problems that we are creating in this era is emphasized here. Now, the biologists like Barnowski, Kingsford et al., they have warned that we are heading towards the 6th mass extinction since the beginning of life on the planet Earth. Ecologists estimate that the current extinction rate is 1,000 times more than the previous extinction rates. And the result will be a massive loss of between 30 and 40% of the extant species by the middle of the 21st century. I must quote Gaia Vince, who is saying that Earth is now an human planet. We decide whether a forest stands or is raised, will survive or go extinct. So we are the most numerous big animals on Earth, and it is an extraordinary time. Barbara Kingsolver's, particularly, I have focused on 2 novels because time is very short and I cannot concentrate on the non-fiction. Prodigal Summer and Behavior. Prodigal Summer published in 2000 and Flight Behavior in 2012. So these works can be read as extinction tales, as they foreground the current anthropocenic extinction crisis and the fate of the vanishing species. In these two novels, she has concentrated on two species, coyotes and the royal monarchs. First, in Prodigal Summer, the story is like that. Dana Wolf is a reclusive wildlife ecologist and a forest ranger, and she discovers the coyote family that has moved into the ecological niche of Zubelun County, left by extinct red wolf. Now, this coyote family gets survival threat from bounty hunters. Kingsolver, through her character, Diana, describes how the coyote is considered the most hated species in America. US government is involved in the business of exterminating them using cyanide traps and gun helicopters. I must quote Edward Abbey from Desert Solitaire. In Desert Solitaire, Abbey has vividly describes the human predation of top carnivores. He advocates that predators' conservation is and protection is necessary to maintain the biological pyramid. He wrote, quote, "We need more predators, we need more coyotes, more mountain lions, more wolves, fox, and wildcats, more owls, hawks, and eagles." Moving monarchs of the king billies, as the locals call them. Scientific studies show how a drastic decline in the monarchs is like a pattern in this climate change era. And the population is vulnerable to threats like severe climate shifts and pesticides. Gary Arnold, in his paper, "We Are Losing Monarchs Fast, Here's Why," said that the culprit were the culprit humans, the twin forces of human-caused climate change and the habitat loss, are now threatening North American monarch butterfly extinction. This is a quote from Flight Behavior, in which the scientist Ovid Byron is saying that we are seeing a bizarre alteration of the previously stable pattern. If we study all the scientific records, we will find that there is a generational migrational behavioral pattern of the monarch bird. But because of the climate change, this species, extraordinary species, is declining fast. This is the last slide. And I want to emphasize that these novels, along with Barbara Kingsolver's non-fiction, can be read cautionary tales. Ursula K. Heise, in her book, Imagining Extinction, has elaborated what are cautionary tales. These may be the nightmares of future devastation. So all her works can be read as cautionary tales. Kingsolver represents the precise scientific truth. She is an evolutionary biologist. And in her fictional portrayal of the extinction risks of the various species, she wants to emphasize that the catastrophic effects of the extinction is global. So it is not limited to something local. It is from local to the planetary scales and integrate the newer and more persistent concern of the Anthropocenes. I think I have a few seconds left, so I want to share one. Yes, I think can be seen. So this is ICUN red list. See, the coyotes are the least concern, and monarch butterflies are not given any kind of status. So this in this paper, I haven't argued whether they should be given a proper status or not. Something about what Deborah Bird Rose in this extinction studies book has emphasized. The coyotes and the butterflies represents those numerous species and which are going extinct, a quite a systematic process of loss. And another writer, I want to add this, that this is Ursula K. Heise's book from, so she visited a retail store in Hong Kong, and there she got these small toy figures of all the species that are. So Kingsolver, as a biologist and a novelist, questions whether we are really adding to this list or not. What are our responsibilities and what are the hope for the future we can offer to stop this climate crisis and the thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for raising the concern. And now we have with us Maria Shima, Faculty of English, Sarojini Naidu Vanita Mahavidyalaya, Hyderabad. Her topic is Pliability in Stephen King's The Stand. Maria Shima.
Sorry.
Yes. Good afternoon to the organizers of this conference and my co-participants here. My topic for paper presentation is playability in the Stephen King's novel The Stand. Before that, I wanted to start with the lines of the poem by Langston Hughes. I went down to the river. I sat down on the bank. I tried to think but couldn't, so I jumped in and sank. After the creation of man and getting banished from heaven, the struggle for life begins, which lasted for an eternity. Right from birth, a common individual wrestles against the odds of life to achieve success, whether it is in the educational field or to meet the demands of the society or to become successful. Randomly, success touches the feet of human being where hindrances do not welcome him. Resilience is a virtue that enables people to move through hardship and become better. No one escapes pain, fear, and suffering. Yet, from pain can come wisdom, from fear can come courage, from agony can come strength. If humans have the virtue of resilience. Now, my topic I have taken up this has a research here by Stephen King, the novel by Stephen King, The Stand. The novel is a post-apocalyptic horror story that reworks the scenario of King's earlier short story called Night Surf. The Stand is a contemporary epic fantasy set in the world devastated by superflu like AIDS-like virus, which is called as the Captain Tripper, which has there is no defense except a natural immunity. The book has paid more attention to arousing terror than examining the nature of evil. The novel's first part takes place over 19 days with the escape and spread of human-made biological weapon, a super flu virus known as formerly known as Project Blue, but commonly it is called in the rest of the novel as Captain Trips. The epidemic leads directly to the death of estimated 99.4% of the world's human population. When this has happened, one man escaped from a biological weapon and facility after an accident carrying with him the deadly virus known as Captain Trips. And rapidly, that virus and flu has spread across the world population. It can wipe out the world population in within a few weeks. They are all dream about two of you, and during this time, there is two types of people who are survivors, and it is about a band of small people set out in a epic quest, which results in a confrontation with evil. The idea of a small group on a quest is explored in several ways in King's novel. The novel traces the journey of the various people who try to find the means to come together and survive during and after the plague. During this, there are two people who have been two opposing figures, and they have been divided into these two opposing figures. Randall Flagg, who is a dark man, and Mother Abigail, who receives visions from God. And the surviving party is split into two factions here. One is led by Flagg and one by Mother Abigail. They prepare for the final stand between the good and the evil. The two factions prepare for a confrontation between the forces of good and evil. King outlines the total breakdown and destruction of society through widespread violence, protest, paranoia, the failure of martial law to contain the outbreak, and eventually the death of virtually the entire population. The human toll is also dealt with as the few survivors must care for their families and
You have
friends,
only 1 minute.
relieve and
1 minute.
grieve as they go of accomplice to the flu. Yes, sir.
Only
Hello.
1 minute. Please conclude. Please conclude.
Yes, please. Yes, I'm just within 1 minute. I'm concluding. The second half of the book is just about the depicts the confrontation between the forces of darkness and the forces of light. There is a strong supernatural element, and There is neither horror nor science fiction, but it is horrifying and how the people resilient towards the good and the evil here. The Stand, the novel, which does not exactly have the the good guys turned into the bad one, but the bad guys to the good one, but it is explore the thing that is meant not to give up in the any situation. In my conclusion, The Stand is inherently optimistic in that it depicts a gradual reassertion of the mankind pick itself out of ashes and ultimately restore the moral and ecological balance. Despite all these horrifying, grisly scenes, the book is also a testament to the enduring human values of courage, kindness, friendship, and love. The word of Camus I ended. Happiness too is inevitable. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Shima. Now, I will invite Dr. Prema Rocha, Associate Professor, Department of English, St. Xavier's College, Mapusa, Goa, who will talk on When Reality Imitates Art, Revisiting the Plague and Contagion.
Thank you,
Dr.
sir.
Prema Rocha. Yes,
Thank
you
you.
are on.
Good day, everyone. I'd like to express my gratitude to the organizers of this wonderful event for this academic platform. My paper is titled When Reality Imitates Art, Revisiting the Plague and Contagion. Here goes. My paper considers how transmittable illnesses have been part of the genre of horror, which aims to entertain through the evocation of fear. In dealing with the macabre, horror fiction has highlighted infections and contagions from killer microbes since ancient times. Similarly, films have been fertile soil for apocalypses and plagues. The COVID-19 pandemic has witnessed a resurgence of interest in epidemic-themed literature and film, which have been trending since. This paper engages with the manner in which The Plague by Albert Camus and the film in 1992 and the film Contagion by Steven Soderbergh in 2011 are strangely prescient. The paper begins by examining the aesthetics and psychology behind horror films and looks at how fear can be a gratifying experience. In this regard, Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and Aristotle's theories have been considered. The Plague was published by Camus in 1947. This existential novel has been regarded as his finest work. The fictional narrative is set in the town of Oran in French Algeria of the 1940s. The rats in town begin to die. Next, people fall ill. Panic grips people. Dr. Bernard Rio, the local physician, is concerned about the manner in which the rats die. The bubonic plague is the killer. Along with other doctors, he beseeches the unheeding authorities to act. They quarantine the town, sealing it off from the larger world. 74 years since its publication, the novel and the film on it is witnessing skyrocketing sales and viewing. The powerful allegorical work foreshadows life at the moment as we know it all too well. The quarantines in the town, sealing it off from the larger world, we are all too familiar with. The present moment, beset by the COVID-19 pandemic, resonates with the dread, paranoia, and uncertainty that accompany the corresponding lockdowns and quarantines depicted in the novel. Today, the plague also resonates with a different kind of plague, that of a destructive, materialistic, capitalistic one. And perhaps that is why Camus' Plague speaks so loudly to us now. The film Contagion in 2011 comprises a star-studded cast including Matt Damon, Jude Law, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Kate Winslet. The plot is built on a fomite traveling virus which invades humanity, multiplying exponentially and creating havoc at the micro and macro level. It clearly resonates with the current chaos and crisis caused by COVID-19. The synchronicity is uncanny. Video streaming platforms like Amazon Prime and YouTube witnessed a resurgence of interest in the film produced by Soderbergh nearly 10 years ago as the coronavirus colonized human conversation. This movie showed us that fact can be stranger than fiction. Not touching your face, social distancing, no handshaking or contact, isolation, frequent hand washing. Sounds familiar? COVID-19 set many new normals. It brought us to our knees. People died suddenly, there was lack of knowledge, and no cure for a very long time. Such narratives enable theorizing of the place of the common man in this context. In the Shepherd Memorial Lecture in January of this year, Homi Bhabha deliberated upon the role of the humanities in the pandemic. He considered the moral balance of the pandemic, not just its scientific and public health implications. It made us aware of the deep social injustice and inequality. After all, he said, interpretation is not just philological, but ethical. In conclusion, Camus' Plague and Soderbergh's Contagion draw their power from their refusal to be science fiction. They tell credible stories within boundaries of scientific understanding. They illuminate how our world might respond as they showcase a spectrum of responses to such pestilences. They narrate the stories of collective effort that mirror the courage and compassion in the midst of fear. They also depict exploitation and those who simply and ruthlessly take advantage. They remind us most of all that we have a reciprocal relationship with nature, our planet, and with other forms of life. And to forget that would be to do so at our own peril. To quote Haruki Murakami, once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure, in fact, whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. And that is what this storm is all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prema Rocha. I would like to invite our last presenter, Sharon R. and Priscilla B. Evangeline from Hellor Institute of Technology. And their topic is Literature of Pandemic and Resilience, a study of love in the time of cholera.
Good afternoon, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good afternoon. My paper proposes to provide an insight that the pandemic literature, revealing the impact of pandemic on society as well as the remarkable human resilience. Throughout the human history, there have been a number of pandemics like cholera, plague, and current COVID-19 also. The pandemic is an infectious disease widespread over a large part of the world. But the resilience is the human ability to recover quickly from adverse circumstances. It is the significant to know that many people develop the certain desirable times, practice healthy habits during the pandemic. The more quality time was spent with families and habits like gardening and reading books are jealously pursued. The lovers of literature turn to books for the healing touch. There has been a prolific production of pandemic literature down the ages. The Garcia Marquez, Love in the Time of Cholera, bears able the testimony to the resounding success of pandemic-related themes in the world literature. The Marquez was the Colombian writer who was awarded Nobel Prize in the Literature 1982 for his novel and short story with the remarkable blending of realism and fantasy. The Love in the Time of Cholera is the masterpiece by Marquez. It is the classical piece of pandemic literature. It is the classical example of literature which explores love as an emotional and mental plague in the backdrop of cholera pandemic. There is a subtle hint that love is a literal illness, a plague that could be compared to the cholera. The author says that love sickness is a literary illness and a plague like cholera. The short story takes place in the background of cholera breakout. The narrated in the background, the cholera breakout, the novel turns the spotlight on the devastating effect of pandemic on the lives of people. At the same time, the remarkable human traits of resilience is highlighted in the novel Love in the Time of Cholera. The novel is set in the period from 1875 to 1924. The locality in northern Colombia. The World War and cholera threatened people. The impact of these threats upset the normal life. The main character of the novel is the Femina Daza and Florenta, who fall in love at the first sight and succeed in getting her to agree to marry them. The secret affair develops to which Femina's aunt provides help to exchange love letters, but Femina's father forces his daughter to stop meeting Lorenza. She changes her mind and marries Dr. Albino, a successful and widely popular person. And then hero resolves to wait until the doctor dies so that he Pamina can be together. At the end of the novel can encapsulate the wonderful resilience and determination of protagonist. The vessel carrying the lovers and also carries Cholera's patient. The love story of the both against the pandemic backdrop will ever remain green in our memory as the child of underlining the patience and resilience. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have come to the concluding part. I would like to invite the listeners to present with your comments or questions, if any. If any of you want to ask or clarify anything from the presenters, you are invited to ask your questions. We had actually a galaxy of intellectuals today and presentations were from various fields. While discussing the disaster resilience and all these things, we had examples from American literature, core British literature, Indian English literature, crime fiction, horror novel, movie, history, and whatnot. So a beautiful multifaceted session we had just had experienced. So is there any question for anyone? I believe that there is no question, and as we have really a paucity of time, I would like to conclude the session with heartfelt thanks for everyone presented today in this session with one of my favorite quotation from Maya Angelou. I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. So over to Shutapadi and Arnob.
Thanks so much, Amitabh, for chairing the session. And it was an absolute management of time, I must say. So thanks a lot for that. And thanks to our participants also for being so very time bound. And it was a wonderful session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Roy, for chairing this first half of this technical and delegation. Now to Dr. Joydeep Bhattacharya, Associate Professor in the Department of English, Christian College. Sir, over to you now.
Yeah, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you are audible clearly.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Darnal. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizer of this webinar, the convener, Dr. Arnav Ball. And after the wonderful first session, the technical session, in fact, let me start the second part of the technical session. In this session, we have 15 paper presenters. And as I have been told by the convener, Dr. Arnav Paul, we have a very tight schedule as far as time is concerned. So it's almost now 3 o'clock. It's over 3 actually, 3:05. So we have time up to 4:35, 4:35. So precisely, I think it's 1 hour, 30 minutes, something like that. So without wasting any more time, I would invite the speakers now, and I would request each of the speakers to please stick to the time limit. You will be given 5 minutes each for your paper presentation. So therefore, my advice would be, my request would be that instead of reading your whole paper, you please try to sum up your paper, try to present the main points of your paper, okay, and try to abide by the time constraint. So here we have the first one in the list, Dr. Sanchita Das. Dr. Sanchita Das is teaching in the Department of English of Surya Sen Mahavidyalaya, Siliguri. And the title of her paper, Exploring the Mode in Pandemics with Pandemic Literature. Dr. Sanchita Das.
Yes, good day to all. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Hello?
You please go ahead.
Okay. So my title of my paper is Exploring the Mode in Pandemics with Pandemic Literature. Pandemics has been experienced by all generations and eventually tackled them successfully. A lot of writers and poets from various cultures have written and documented their experiences during a pandemic, ranging from the Spanish flu outbreak to the Black Plague to the Great Plague of London. Though the resources and technologies have varied across the numerous pandemics, the emotion and mindset of the people have more or less stayed the same. The different works of literature based on the lives of people living through pandemics can teach us about ways to tackle the emotional stress that comes with being confined within the four walls of our homes. This literature also shines a hopeful light on life after the pandemic. The aim of my paper is to explore how literature helps us to make sense of the pandemic and post-pandemic life. The outbreak of the bacterium Yersinia pestis ravaged the city of London from 1665 to 66 and over 1 lakh people of the estimated population of 4,60,000. A Journal of the Plague Year, a historical novel published in March 1722 by Daniel Defoe, and is an account of an one man's experiences in the city of London during the bubonic plague. We consider Defoe's work a viable option to understand life during the plague, and this literary work beautifully describes the mindset of the Londoners during an unsettling and uncertain time. Defoe observes that many people were confused and a cloud of uncertainty roamed over their heads. But some people were braver and more understanding of the situation around them. Some were also ignorant of the plague, but a trait they all shared was fear. Everything in London was scared of this unknown disease roaming their streets. To reflect on the relevance of this literature, it is important to study it over time. The observation of different characteristics within people is a good start. Every person reacts differently to a pandemic. Some try to understand the problem and face the troubles bravely, but some people cave into the fear of unknown and are not able to fully comprehend the situation. Reading through the novel certainly teaches us to be strong and confident, but still cautious in the face of pandemic. Panic and fear will only give birth to additional problems. And in the novel, the poor had to figure things out of their own, while the wealthy fled the city rather than support and help their city men, and everyone should have helped each other and supported the economy together. This literature helps to identify some common negative modes across various pandemics. If we reflect the literature to the modern day, we can feel the struggles and emotions of what people went through then. People are still rioting as they did a century ago for a livelihood amongst the pandemic. Literature may not always provide concrete solutions, but it certainly teaches us not to be better than we previously were. People should be aware of our actions and actively help each other to tackle the everyday problems because, as literature and history show, such disease does not vanish overnight. The year of 1974 in India saw over 15,000 lives taken away by one of the worst smallpox epidemics in the world. India reported over 60,000 cases in just 5 months. It wasn't until 1980 when smallpox was completely eradicated from the world. But the sad poem of Rabindranath Tagore, Puraton Britto, written in 23rd February 1895, long before the smallpox epidemic. This poem is still relevant to this day for its themes of loyalty, care, and brotherhood. The poem is from the point of view of a wealthy zamidar who has a servant named Keshto, who by all means is a lousy and lazy servant. Even the zamidar's wife considers him a nuisance for the family, but his loyalty is remarkably shown when the zamidar travels to Vrindavan to pray and falls prey to the deadly smallpox disease. When all his fellow travelers left him on his way, it was Keshto who took care of him with no regard for his health. The Zamidar's lifesaver fell into the hands of smallpox, but fulfilled his words of sending his master to his wife safe and sound. When all his dear friends left him to suffer, it was the loyalty of his servant that gave him the strength to fight off the disease. In the face of uncertainty, a flash of hope goes a long way. Keshto's love and loyalty towards his master saved a life. This poem should serve as a lesson for us to help each other in whatever we can. A small glimmer of hope can go a very long way for someone in need. Even something as small as encouraging words can help brighten a patient's day and give them positive energy to fight against a common enemy. The positive thing my paper
Sanchita,
gathered is that as a
please
society,
sum up, Sanchita.
yes, sir, we are getting better in tackling the post-pandemic life. In Defoe's post-pandemic account, people had returned to their original ways as if the outbreak had never happened. In Tagore's poem, we can feel the sadness and regret the Zamidar when he loses his most loyal friend. As the literature has shown us, pandemics can and will be beaten. The damage done, however, is the reaction of our action. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sanchita Das, for her wonderful overview of disaster resilience as reflected, as represented, as mediated by literature spanning over centuries. Thank you. Our next paper presenter will be Mr. Apurva Huda. Apurva Huda is a PhD scholar in Manav Rachana International Institute of Research and Studies, and the title of his paper is Literary Perspective of Historical Holocaust and Resilience, a study of Chaman Nahal's Azadi. Mr. Huda, please.
I'm Purva Huda. My paper is on Chaman Nahal's Azadi, and the title is, as Sir has told, Literary Perspective of Historical Holocaust and Resilience, a study of Chaman Nahal's Azadi. Partition novels, the novels that center around the tragic theme of partition of the Indian subcontinent, which happened in 1947, constitute an important subgenre of the Indian English novel. This event resulted in widespread violence against humanity. This unfortunate bloodbath inspired many creative writers to depict the horrors of this Holocaust in their writings, films, documentaries, paintings, and plays. The writers poignantly described the suffering and pain caused due to the mass migration of refugees from both sides of the border. Page after page is filled with heart-rending stories of violence, rape, abduction, torture, murder, uprootedness, and pillage. Nehal's Azadi has rightly been called Adi has rightly been called a powerful portrayal of an individual's torment caused by the working of certain historical forces. The novel not only exacts the hopeful dawn of Indian independence and tragedy of the partition, the massed massacres and the vast influx of refugees, but also weaves these important historical events within the fabric of a fictional narrative, describing the family members of Lala Kanshiram, condensing the whole Holocaust within the walls of his family. The author presents the whole picture through the minds of two characters, Lala Kanshiram and Arun, representing two different generational and two different value systems and worldviews. The action of the novel alternates between Lala Kanshiram and Arun as centers of consciousness. This novel opens with an important historical date, that is 3rd June 1947, when Mountbatten was going to make an important announcement about the freedom of India and the partition of the subcontinent into India and Pakistan. Before this announcement, the great historical personages, Mountbatten, Wavell, Gandhi, are presented in the context of the novel through the raptures of Lala Kanshiram, for whom the false dawn of independence was followed by the black dance of passion and red of bloodbath. He, along with inhabitants of Bibi Amravati's two houses, wait for the announcement and are stunned to hear about the partition of the country. The Viceroy's announcements were followed by the appearance of Nehru, who, in spite of being meek and gentle, failed to win the sympathy of the people who had gathered in the minor studded living room of Bibi Amravati. Besides introducing and even exposing all the important historical personages at the outset, Chaman Nehal very artistically depicts the effects of this politico-historical decision, the partition, on the lives of common men and women, the people who spoke a common tongue, whose in identical clothes, and responded to the weather, to the heat, and the first rains in identical manner. All of a sudden became conscious of their separate religious and ethnic identities. They now became Hindus and Muslims, or the majority and minority community. The most painful and humiliating effect of the partition upon the innocent people is what happens to Lala Kanshiram's foot convoy in the course of their journey to the Indian border. Since the tasks ahead of the group are multitudinous, they falter and fumble. By the time the convoy of Hindus reach Amritsar, they were already turned into unwilling beggars, begging from small pittances and favors of the corrupt and inefficient bureaucrats. In the midst of this ethnic holocaust, Nahel presents the love story of Arun and Noor by employing the techniques of reminiscence, flashback, and nostalgia, a vital feature in postmodern historical novels. Their romance and love story is linked with historical holocaust when, in the bitter climate of communal hatred, even their profound love for one another can no longer remain personal and pure. The communal bitterness penetrates so deep in the lives of the people that close friends such as Arun and Munir too feel estranged from each other. Nehel also hints at various historical references in the conversation between Indians and their English friends. He refers to details from recent history such as the 1929 Congress session, the Quit India movement, the arrival of Wavell as Viceroy, the Shimla Conference, British Cabinet mission, etc. He mixes all these factual events of history with his own imaginative history. For example, along with these historical details, he presents fictional tours of Gandhi to Punjab, of the of the Prince of Wales to Saikot. Like Dr. Nahel argues that the account of Gandhi's tour to Punjab and Prince of Wales' visit to Sailcoat is entirely fictitious. So he has included certain facts and he has also included certain fictitious elements from his own memory.
Madam,
Nahel,
please conclude.
yes, sir.
Please conclude, madam.
Yes, sir. Nahel's role in the novel is like that of a political historian having some personal convictions and opinions which he presents through different characters. In spite of making Kanshiram his mouthpiece in the novel, he retains a startling aesthetic objectivity. By merging fact and fiction, history and novel, autobiography and romance, Nahel is able to project vividly the deeply felt tragic experiences of the people at the time of partition. This genre can easily be called a documented historical novel, which is defined which is defined as the conventional distinction between history and fiction that threatens to collapse for the novelist and the historian when they share the same event. No doubt, the documented historical novelist is in a position similar to the historian, but because he is writing fiction and not history, he operates between different set of generic conventions. To put it very simply, the difference is that the historian is supposed to restrict himself to historical events, while the documented history novelists are free to fill in with imagined details, the gaps in recorded history. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. And one thing just to mention you that all the question answers, all the question answer session, everything we will have at the end of this technical session. That means after the presentation of all the papers. Okay. So if you have any queries, I'm talking to the audiences that if you have any queries, you please keep your queries and for the end of this technical session. Now the third speaker in the list is Mr. Samik Chakrabarti, a student of the Department of English, Sri Venkateswaraya College, University of Delhi. And the title of his paper is Navigating the Articulation of Trauma and Resistance in Shikhita Patitar Atmacharit. Mr. Chakrabarti?
Hello. Yeah. Am I audible and visible?
Yeah, sure.
All
Please
right.
go ahead.
All right. All right. So, my regards to all. The verbalizing of narratives of resistance not only gives us an insight into the cultural memory of identities, but also they give us an understanding of the larger universality of human existence and perseverance. It is through this narrativization of trauma of Manada Devi's lived experiences, through the narrative of Pakle Farm and Le Creature Feminine, through this reclamation of the literary and literal space in the Bhadralok society, that her resilience shines brilliantly. Manodada Potita, through the violence and trauma that is a disaster in the narrative, sheds light to the disasters otherwise unseen by the heteropatriarchal Bhadralok culture, but actually leave irreversible psychological trauma and terror on the face of Manoda and also many other sex workers like her. So we had this trend of so we had this trend of this young girls being swayed by men and then being sold off and they becoming prostitutes, and this is a trend that is there in Calcutta. It's a huge trend, so I'm referring to that. Through the grouping together and marching of the streets on the streets of Calcutta, thereby attracting a great spectacle, numerous sex workers make themselves visible, thereby subverting the deep-rooted seeds of what had caused the individual disasters in their lives in the first place, leading to a macro disaster affecting them as a community. So Perez, while talking about disaster, says that the formation of narrative, however, creates a new set of memories based on the original episodic details. So in this idea of the confessional, in the stylistics of the autobiography, it's a confessional stylistics that she employs, and in the Gramscian sense, this also talks about the hegemony of one memory over the other because of violence. So the violence affects one memory so brilliantly that it overtakes all these other overriding memories when we recollect through the act of recollection. So this so her narrative not only talks about the how sexual liberation and how sexual agency of women is looked down upon by Brahmanical patriarchy and this out of wedlock sexual union because of concerns of land and patriarchy and the Vamsa and lineage, but it also talks about this complete denudation of her class, caste. She was a Brahmin, class, caste, and education. She was an educated Brahmin woman, and to that position, to that structural privilege, to this extreme marginalization, extreme denudation of all identities, to the reality of being a potita. So it raises existential, ontological, metaphysical questions, and also questions about the dominant morality and its internalization because of trauma. So she is basically critiquing this idea of sex work, and she's critiquing the idea of female sexuality, the agency in female sexuality, but I actually contrapuntally read it to and therefore she loathes her decision to utilize her agency and use her sexual power according to her wish. But in verbalizing the same, she actually disrobes the hidden duplicity of Brahmanical society. It becomes a mockery of the hypocritical patriarchal men who are regular visitors to the fallen woman, the man who mercilessly beats her up and sells her jewelry to purchase alcohol, the hypocrisy of the religious leaders who unflinchingly take sexual favors from sex workers in private and denounce them publicly. The ultimate contradiction that what was supposed to be the rescue home for women becomes the site of sexual harassment, offense, and oppression against women. She tells us that inside the civilization run and ruled by men lies a deep crack of farce and duplicity, therefore stripping the Bhadralok of any and every Bhadruta. Right. So she also talks about the feminine sorority and collectivization, which is the Pakle Farm and Literature Feminine. Siksu and Irigere talk about it, and she actually talks about how this comes into existence. She gives a vivid depiction of feminine sorority, a collectivization of women sex workers in order to achieve a common goal of charity. Right. This was something that was completely unprecedented and unheard of. The Brahmanical heteropatriarchal superstructure does not want the reality of it or the existence of sex work to emerge out in the open at the heart of polite society. The glorious Bhadralok Samaj, even when paradoxically the powerful men of the society visitors to the Nishidhapalli, right? Such marches were the tight slap on the face of the patriarchal Bhadralok Samaj, asking the Bhadraloks to acknowledge sex work and sex workers as equal citizens, not only just bodies to extract pleasure from, right? So therefore this by the virtue of writing this narrative and by writing this confessional is and also through this nativization of collectivization of women, she actually brings out the resilience that is there after the disaster that happens in her life. So right. So, through the Lacanian mirror, I analyze the perception of the self in this autobiographical narrative while highlighting the hyphenated identity of Manoda as an educated Brahmin prostitute, also the Shikkhita Potita, and its implications on the idea of the self. Although Manoda displayed an acute sense of morality, her narrative stands as a strong scathing critique of the patriarchal Bhadralok Samaj, bringing out the hypocrisy of the Bhadraloks. In Manoda's ideation of narrativization, a traumatic story using language as a weapon, it also brings out the cultural memory of several others like her, blurring the lines of past, present, and future, memory, re-memory, and post-memory, all tied together through memory. Her perseverance lies not only in this recall, but also in the iconic, transformative, subversive potential her autobiography has even today, attacking the superstructure of casteist patriarchy. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Chakravarti. From the study of the partition narrative, now we have listened to Mr. Chakravarti's reading of the trauma and resistance from the perspective of the woman. So thank you, Mr. Chakravarti, again. Our next paper presenter is Mr. Yogesh Kumar Negi, PhD research scholar, Department of English, HNB Garhwal University, Srinagar, Uttarakhand. And the title of his paper is Plague Upon Kashmir and its Struggle for Survival, studying the experience of natives as reflected in the Kashmiri poetry in English. Mr. Yogesh Kumar Negi.
Thank you, sir. And thanks to the organizers for giving us this opportunity. While talking about Kashmir, we all know that it is a place, a disputed territory, which is surrounded by 3 giant nuclear-armed nations around it. And it is a place which is suffering from the toughest of occupation, due to which bloodshed and violence have become a common sight in Kashmir. The valley, which was once known as paradise on earth, has now been turned into a battlefield for nation states around it, especially India and Pakistan, which look at the valley with colonial ambitions. This colonial gaze upon the valley of these 2 nation states is so ugly that it has devoured hundreds and thousands of lives since the insurgency has begun. It is a place where children grow up listening to the violent phraseology and breathing the similar violent air of such as curfew, gun night, gunfight, crackdown, cordon, frisking, pellet guns, injury, disappearances, gunshots, and so on and so forth. For this purpose of the present study, the poetry collection of celebrated author Agha Shahid Ali has to be taken into account. Agha Shahid Ali's notable work, The Country Without Post Office, which was written in 1997, is one such masterpiece which is penned against the backdrop of violence and bloodshed of armed militancy that peaked in 1990s. It pioneers the new wave of Anglophone Kashmiri writing, reclaiming the original narratives from hegemonic discourses of the world outside. In the first part of this collection, the author unfolds the horror of the time which author witnesses himself at an individual and social level. Agha Shahid Ali, in a poem, I See Kashmir from New Delhi at Midnight, perfectly takes us back to the periods of uncertainty where he states Srinagar as a city from where no news can come. The city, which was once a city of dreams for every Kashmiri, is turned into a one which is now so visible in curfewed night. If one cast a look at Kashmir of then, of 90s, where about which the author tries to picturize, and Kashmir of now, there won't be a much difference. Rather, the conditions have become much more appalling. Their basic human rights to live, to work, and to access fundamental services have been snatched brutally. Furthermore, after the August 2019 event when the Kashmir's autonomy was revoked by Indian state by abrogating Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, the territory once again was thrown in a similar conditions that author in this collection is concerned about. A noted Kashmiri author Mirza Wahi laments on the Twitter after the 5th of August 2019, saying, "I'm so sorry, Shahid." I'm quoting, "Kashmir is now officially the country without a post office," I unquote. As far as resilience in Kashmir is concerned, one can be flummoxed to hear and to see that apart from all these things, Kashmiris continue to get denied for the right of peaceful protest, which rest of the other states of this country enjoys. What happens in Kashmir goes beyond the denial of a space for public protest. Abba Shahid Ali also talks about the horror of interrogation and torture centers in which Kashmiri boys and men have been facing these severe tortures for 3 decades now. These are the haunting places from where these men would never return. Either they return severely injured, incapacitated, some dead and some impotent, some would go to a severe trauma. One very important thing which Aga Shahid Ali talked about in this whole collection is it reminds us the current bloodbath on the street of the valley through the powerful imagery of Muharram in Srinagar in 1992, which is also a poem. And he relates the scene of carnage through Muharram, the Muslim month of mourning, which marks the martyrdom of Hussein, who is a Prophet Muhammad's grandson, and his followers in the Battle of Karbala. Is using the metaphor of Muharram and the Battle of Karbala pertinently tells us about the death flies in every city and everywhere in the valley. So he depicts the situation, the conflict-ridden place wherein the natives have stopped going out of the valley. In this place, the new normal that we are talking about today begins affecting the lives abnormally, where the natives have to bear in mind the military instructions wherever they go or stay. Firstly, are very often trained or instructed to huddle inside their houses. In case of not following the instructions, one cannot return home alive, but can possibly fall prey to bullets or any other violent occurrence. Secondly, the Kashmiris are systematically caged inside the valley, and thus this new normal makes the people of Kashmir very prone to humiliation and even get attacked in several ways if they are outside Kashmir.
Mr. Negi, please try to conclude.
Okay, sure. So I would say the natives that were yet surviving these tragedies for these last 3 decades, another disaster of coronavirus pandemic takes hold of the situations, and this time by snatching all remaining rights. The rest of the world might have been witnessing lockdown, curfew, uncertainties, and difficulties for the first time, but as far as Kashmir is concerned, all these features have become a permanent part of the everyday life for decades. Hence, one can say that Kashmir is witnessing and withstanding the pandemic of mass killings, violence, and uncertainties and amidst this ceaseless violence for more than 3 decades now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yogesh Kumar Negi, for speaking about Kashmir, its resilience in the time of crisis. Thank you. Our next paper presenter is Mr. Arghadip Dewan. Arghadip is a student of the 3rd semester at the PG English Department of North Bengal University, and his topic is In Search of Silver Linings with Here Comes the Sun and Aftab. Arghadip Dewan.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present my paper. My paper is In Search of Silver Linings with Here Comes the Sun and Aftab. Darkness is probably the most appropriate term to describe the last 12 months. The virus-induced imprisonment has had scathing effects on our mental health. The life we all had before the debacle is a distant memory now, like the sun lost behind the dark clouds. The uncertainty that has become our guest has some funny effects on our psyches, where we are slowly forgetting the boundaries between our private and public selves. It's like a gloomy monsoon day with the light slowly fading away, the clouds getting ready to unleash a shower of wrath upon the ground. In these extremely challenging times, music, however, can be a balm of comfort over our aching wounds. Music holds the power to uplift the listener from the abyss even for a very little amount of time. Just like a silver lining, it sparks a small fire of inspiration and courage inside our hearts. Silver linings sometimes can spark a moment of inspiration in human beings. It is like a reminder from the universe and a grand cliche that however dark it gets, light will always find its way to you. The epiphany that arises out of the outpouring sunlight from the cracks of the clouds gives a meaning to the suffering. However, when I think of the silver linings, I find two songs from two different eras. Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles and Aftab by the Local Train. Two different songs from two different times, from the topsy-turvy countercultural 1960s to the ultra-modern 2010s. Both songs insinuate a similar state of hopelessness and then suggest that the sun will finally come to curb the gloom out. They both keep their faith in the sun. Here Comes the Sun was penned by George Harrison on one fine afternoon in early 1969 in Eric Clapton's garden, while the Beatles were in the last stage as an artistic group. It was Harrison's anthem for finding solace in the dark times. Known as the Quiet Beatle, it was Harrison's way of reassuring us that although it's been a long, cold, lonely winter, the sun has finally come out and it's all right. The extremely cold and torturous winter is followed by a rising sun, scattering rays of hope. The abstractness of the dark and cold and sad state that was prevailing before the sun is definitely the muddy state of psychological angst. The song was written at the backdrop of a very tumultuous time in Harrison's life. Shortly before, in January, he quit the Beatles temporarily because of the disagreements with Lennon over the Get Back recording sessions. Relations with Lennon and other bandmates were strained. His health was also in decline. Most importantly, their much ambitious business venture, Apple Corps, was bleeding money. But as the story of the song suggests, Harrison was in search of a silver lining in that cloudy phase. Almost like a raconteur, Harrison here chronicles the anxious wait for the sun and, more importantly, the feeling of reassured peace when it finally comes out. The shining beacon of hope that comes with the song is reflected by the fact that Mary Greeley Medical Center in Iowa played the opening tune of the song whenever a COVID-19 patient is removed from the ventilator last year. The trend perhaps started in a hospital in New York, which in early March 2020 played the song when it released its first successfully COVID recovered patient. Such a cultural icon that are the Beatles, Here Comes the Sun, with its soothing melody and heartful vocals, has embodied their inherent search for silver linings in human existence. Moving on from one countercultural pioneers to different set of pioneers, the local trend describes itself as an independent band. If the Fab Four of the 1960s was responsible for making pop rock music a vast area of experimentation, the local trend is responsible for giving the indie music ecosystem of India a voice of conviction as well as providing impetus to the somewhat declining band culture in India. Rolling Stone India called them the flag bearers of college-aged angst and dreams. Aftab is a song about belief in oneself and on the path that he has taken and on the sun. Aftab means sun or sunlight. The band says that they wrote it for a friend and it's about when you're feeling bitter. A predominantly acoustic song, much like Here Comes the Sun, Aftab deals with uncertainty in the fear-stricken heart when the night seems endless, where all the paths are shrouded in darkness and you seem to find holed up inside your closed eyelids. The song goes, खामोश भीड़ में फिर हो खुरे गुमशुदा मौजूद हो यहाँ गुम कोई किसको पता. Almost on an existential note, the doubt seems so overwhelming that the existence itself is shrouded in uncertainty. The night in this song is what winter is in Here Comes the Sun. They are symbolic antagonists of existence, they are the perils of psyche. However, both the songs avoid over romanticizing them. It is more of a personal account of struggle. The belief in the sun is something that the song tells us to hold on to. It is this belief that guides us when our raha guzar, our way, is engulfed by the doubts. Somewhere after his self-portrait also, the local train had to face all the difficulties that an independent music artist has to face in India. The lack of financial support, lack of media support, and over-industrialization of music meant that their music had to create a niche for itself in the popular space first, before getting backed by brands. As they have stated multiple times in their interviews, their struggle was only lessened by their own belief in their music and themselves. Finally, Inspiration can come from any unlikely place, and it is also a grand cliche that the hardest of times creates the most potent artistic creations. Although on a very micro level, the two different songs emerge as siblings from two different time periods, the old and wise voice of comfort to a young, troubled artistic mind. The dark cloud surrounds all, and it is only in the indomitable will that the belief resides. The seemingly unwavering belief can be rattled also, and in those desperate times, it is the job of a silver lining to remind us to hold on. Thank you.
Thank you, Argadeep, for showing us the beautiful musical silver lining in the time of crisis. Our next speaker is Mrs. Reena Devi, Assistant Professor of English, CIS Kanya Mahavidyalaya, Fatehpur, Haryana, and she will talk about lessons of resilience in the poetry of Wallace Stevens. Mrs. Reena Devi. Mrs. Reena Devi. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, all of you. Today's my paper's topic is Lessons of Resilience in the Poetry of Wallace Stevens. I'm going to read out my paper. Writers of the modern age lived through the agony of world wars. It impacted their psyche to a great extent. They could very well understand that humanity in general had suffered a great setback. Most of the modern writers talk about the disintegration of human values in their works. While T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland depicts the spiritual decline and the loss of faith, W.B. Yeats speaks about the chaos in his poem The Second Coming. Quote, things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Wallace Stevens records his response in the form of poetry that is founded on introspection and clairvoyance, whereas the building block
Mrs. Reena Devi, you are not audible. I think
she has to
Yeah.
unmute herself, I think. She has got muted by
there are great lessons of resilience in his poetry and a lot for humanity to fall back upon. Very rarely, Stevens talks about the war in his poetry. The images of destruction and pains are hard to find in his poetic world. If at all they find a mention, it is by way of reconciliation. In part 11th of his poem Phases, he writes, war has no haunt except the heart, which envy haunts and hate and fear, and malice and ambition near the haunt of love. Here in this poem, he talks about peace before he mentions war. He ends this section with the assertion, look deep and let the truth be known. All the negative emotions that war has generated fade away in the haunt of love. Elsewhere, talking about war, he exclaims, war is periodical failures of politics. War is to be accepted as an abnormality that would take place periodically whenever politics fails. It is such generalizations through which he addresses the realities of life in his poems. Here is all the more interested in the creative act. Many of his poems and essays theories about the act of writing poetry, the purpose for poetry for him to contribute to men's happiness. In his poem of modern poetry, he talks about the poetic act, the poem of the mind in the act of finding what will suffice. It has to be living to learn the speech of the place. It has to face the man of time. It has to think about war. It has to construct a new stage. While the world is engulfed in the cruelty of war, it becomes impossible to evade this reality in the poetic world. But Stevens chose not to indulge in the gory details of war and instead focused his attention on the reconciliation with this periodical failure. For this, he employs imagination to view reality in a wider perspective. He says reality is not what it is. It consists of many realities which it can be made on into. By using imagination, the poet has to create a poetic world which he calls a supreme fiction. In this world, all the opposites get reconciled. He tries to see the world right with the help of creating supreme fiction in his poetry. We find a number of lessons of resilience in his poems. The poet, in the next poem, The Domination of Black, he tackles the emotions of fear of death. He uses symbolism to deal with the reality of death. Interestingly, nowhere in the poem he uses the word death. The whole poem is an enactment of the great drama of life and death, but the presentation is imaginative. He uses various symbols of life and death side by side. It is night time, but there is fire in the room. There are fallen leaves, while at the same time there is wind playing upon them. The emotions of fear starts dominating his imagination with the thought of heavy hemlocks, again a symbol of death, but at once comes to the mind the cry of peacocks, a symbol of rebirth. We find in the poem, I heard them cry, the peacocks. Was it a cry against the twilight or against the leaves themselves, turning in the wind, turning in the fire, turning as the tails of the peacocks, turning in loud fire, loud as hemlocks, full of cry of peacocks, or was it a cry against the hemlocks? The cry of peacocks is symbolic of the life struggling against death. By repeating the word turning, the poet wants to emphasize the turning that keep the motion alive in the life cycle. Being a modern poet, he uses modern technique of symbolism, impressionism, and aestheticism. His poetry reaches the metaphysical levels to resolve conflicts. He considers happiness to be the highest pursuit of life, and he considers success to be happy with the wise. Thus, wisdom in his pursuits, which gets reflected in his poetic world when he seeks answers to his innumerable questionings. For Stevens, poetry is a means of redemption, the necessary angel as
Madam, please conclude. Please
okay,
conclude.
sir. Sir, okay. He also gives his theory of supreme fiction in the poetry. He says that a poet's imagination works on experiences and transforms them into a higher reality. Thus, in his poem Sunday Morning, he comes up with the supreme fiction, death is the mother of beauty, hence from her alone shall come fulfillment to our dreams and desires. Death is giving life a beauty. It completes the life cycle and makes way for birth. In these lines, Stevens resonates the idea Shelley propounded in the West Ode to West Wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? The devastation caused by the wars is sure to bring peace in the end. Stevens, like many other great poets, wants to keep the hope alive in desperate times. He deals with the plethora of images, emotions, and ideas in his poetic world to convey that there is much more in this world than just the war. War is an aberration and sanity will prevail in the end. In his poetry, he creates a whole world of nobility and tries to redeem the lost faith. However, in restoring the faith of humanity, he never loses sight of reality. He stresses categorically in Sunday Morning, quote, we live in an old chaos of the sun, old dependency of day and night, or island solitude, unsponsored of that are escapable. In the end, Stevens makes us realize that desire for an imperishable bliss is unreal. Pleasure comes at the cost of bearing all the pain. We are destined to live a life full of contradictions.
Please
Finding
conclude.
pleasure.
Please conclude.
Sir, only one second, sir. Finding pleasure
Okay.
in the idea of paradise. Finding pleasure in the idea of paradise after death is unacceptable to humanity. Cherished, and we must accept the earth to be the only paradise that can be. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. Jayashree Das. Jayashree Das is a student of the Department of English in Guwahati University, Assam, and she will talk about resilience in the literature of post-apocalyptic world order. Jayashree Das.
Hello.
My request would be to the following speakers that you please stick to the time, okay? Because if you forget the time limit, then you will end up, eating up the time of your following speakers. So please try to stick to the time limit, okay? Okay, please go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, sir, and warm greetings to all the participants. Well,
My topic is on the resilience in the literature of post-apocalyptic world order. Well, events of September 11, 2001 left North American people recoiled with fear, anger, anxiety, confusion, and a stress of living under attack. This historical event stimulated a stark emotional reaction as the attack was unprovoked. A harsh reality crashed upon America, assaulting in a prevailing sense of negativity and pessimism. The ramifications of this emotional state lasted and penetrated the American literary culture, and as time passed, one genre of literature notably changed more distinctly than others. Post-apocalyptic novels have been representative of human resilience and transformation. The change in the core representation revealed the linguistic pessimism, which emerged during the hopeless decade because of the fear caused by 9/11. The text that I have examined and identified as an example of this hopeless post-apocalyptic world is The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which shows a sharp increase in realism and pessimism. The plot resolution of the text is identifiably based on American settings and contain indeterminate and that are deliberately left unidentifiable as hopeless or hopeful. Though much has been written about the events surrounding September 11th, very little research casted a specific focus on a post-apocalyptic genre. However, the author did something that broke the mold of previously established patterns, as the work dared to portray the harsh realism of a modern apocalyptic event. One of the most important central theme of post-apocalyptic texts is the ultimate recovery of the land. The biological landscapes presented in The Road are fundamentally toxic or will never recover in a sustainable way. The ecologies got permanently destroyed by the events. The novel dwells on the concept of life as we knew it, which means they idealize the nostalgic past in order to cope with their present. Cormac McCarthy in The Road asserts that the earth will never recover. The plot of the text is driven by an unnamed event that destroyed the natural world. McCarthy intentionally avoids specific details that causes the event to resonate with the reader. The only insight that McCarthy gives about the actual event which destroyed the world is the memory that the man has, where I would like to quote, "The clock stopped at 1:17, a long sheer of light and then a series of low concussions. He went into the bathroom and threw the light switch, but the power was already gone. A dull rose glow in the window glass," unquote. No further details are given about the event, and the only clue lie in the way that McCarthy described the dead earth. The background that McCarthy establishes is important as an expression of his criticism of modern man's present situation. The man knows that the world will never be the same as it was. McCarthy utilizes the contrast of the man's memories and nostalgia to convey the immense hopelessness of the world. The man is symbolic to the division between a world that was salvageable and a world that is beyond saving. And the notion of life as we knew it is prevalent in the decade of hopelessness, as the modernity of the novel dictates that there is a point of no return. Much like the events of 9/11, post-apocalyptic novels deals with trauma and doubt and there prevails a struggle with God and religion. When the world is destroyed, the first response that triggers many survivors is doubt, and typically they begin to question God. In opposition to this doubt, some survivors turn to God for saving them. A third common response that gets represented in the genre is the God's complex struggle and the issue of taking on the role of the deity. In a wake of hopelessness lies death, because faith and optimism are all that maintains life. The novel hinge upon belief as the measure of pessimism or optimism. Believers are left to struggle with understanding their survival in terms of a cosmic being, while non-believers are left questioning their existence. While this confusion bears a correlative relationship to hopelessness in literature, it certainly bolsters the assertion that Americans are in a religious struggle after the events of 9/11. McCarthy's The Road conducts a very specific contemplation on generational hopelessness. The novel is all about the death of the man, leaving the boy to struggle for survival, but at the same time, also about the murder of the next generation. McCarthy makes a notable attempt to convey the next generation's hopelessness in the face of the world left to them. By viewing the next generation's
Please sum
disappointment,
up, ma'am. Ma'am, please sum up.
yeah. As the hopeless decade draws to a close, there are clear signs of recovered hope in the genre. The decade of hopelessness was a temporary shift in the genre that reflected the situation of the September 11 attacks. The break in the mold allowed for growth and exploration in the creative realm of this type of writing, and McCarthy's The Road influenced writers in the current sphere of post-apocalyptic and even dystopian literature. Due to literature's position in social commentary, it will always be important to look forward to novels to understand our past, present, and future. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jayasri Das. Our next speaker will be Mr. Manodip Chakraborty. Mr. Chakraborty is a postgraduate student in the Department of English in Kuch Bihar Panchanan Burma University, and he will talk about reading Amitabh Ghosh's The Great Derangement as post-humanist resilient text. Mr. Manodip Chakraborty.
Thank you, sir, for this opportunity. Sir, am I audible?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, sir. Once again, I'm Mandeep Chakraborty, and my paper's title is Reading Amitabh Ghosh's The Great Arrangement as a Post-Humanist Resilient Text. Thus, it's a post-humanist analysis of quote-unquote non-fiction. As the time is very limited, so I'm going to just present the basic scenarios of my submitted paper. Well, here goes. As you all know, the first breakthrough in understanding the world was theocentricity. Then in the next stage, we had humanism, which is called Homo Mensura, or man as a measure. It created an anthropocentric worldview. But with the rise of Enlightenment and the two European world wars, anthropocentric worldview gave way to transhumanism. Transhumanism believed that the world is in a dystopic situation because there is limitation in human cognition, and also human understanding suffers from a lack which can be enhanced or which can be fixed through technological advancement. Such features we can find in the cyberpunk genre with films like Matrix, Terminator, and such others. All of them tries to categorize the world through technological enhancement. But the central question still remains, if transhumanism can lead us to a utopian worldview, then why human or humanity is still struggling? It is to find the answer to such questions that posthumanism came into the field. Instead of human centricity of humanism or techno-human enhancement of transhumanism, posthumanism focuses on eco-techno-human synthesis. Ironically enough, even though we sprang from nature, it always remained a subject of categorization for us, and after some time, that nature became an other, binarized and repressed as a familiar object. In this context, Ghosh's The Great Arrangement became a cult text for analysis because until and unless we take into account nature as equally responsible for our existence, it is impossible for us to understand the human world through and through. Well, I'm illustrating this with an example of how nature is familiarized and what is its consequence. Well, it's an encounter by the author and the familiarized nature, and it took place on 17th March 1978. Quote, I buried my head in my arms and lay still. Moments later, the noise died down and was replaced by an eerie silence. When at last I climbed out of the balcony, I was confronted by a scene of devastation such as I had never before beheld. Buses lay overturned, scooters sat perched on treetops, walls had been ripped out of buildings. Quote close. Great Derangement, page number 17. Well, this is a particular instance among many others that Ghosh analyzes throughout the book, and this instance later it turned out to be a tornado, the first of its kind in India, particularly in Delhi. The reason of such uncanny depiction of a storm, well, is the result of our transhumanistic depiction or categorization of the world. Well, to conclude, the reason of such an ambiguous encounter with nature is because it is understood, or we humans understand nature either through human binarisms or techno-categorizations. And if we are to come out of such a state, that would be the resilient state. It is a prerequisite to form a eco-techno-human synthesis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chakraborty. Now I would like to request our next speaker, Mr. Bikram Das, who is a research scholar in the Department of English, Raiganj University. And Mr. Das will talk about adaptiveness or love for hills, locating Ruskin Bond's diasporic voices in India I Love. Mr. Das?
Yes, sir. Sir, am
Yeah.
I audible, sir?
Yeah, sure. Go on.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairperson, sir, and respected organizers for giving me this opportunity. And in this paper, my aim is to show Ruskin Bond's nostalgic feelings for his beloved adopted country, which gives the representation of his sense of Indianness in the cultural identity of Ruskin Bond. Relationship between Ruskin Bond and India has a historical and colonial seed. After the independence, when British Raj came to an end in the process of migration to England, like other British, Ruskin Bond also struggled to make his identity in the new environment of his own homeland. Ruskin Bond, as an Indian author of British descent, chooses to live in an adoptive family in the land of Mussoorie, India. And in the collection in India I Love, Bond tries to portray his historical relationship with India and his nostalgic feelings for his beloved adopted country. As an Indian author, he plays an emotional bridge between the two worlds. In the social and cultural life, Bond tries to get a cultural root from the natural settings of the hills. In this collection, Bond shows his love for India. As he says in the preface of this collection, quote, "India that I love does not make headlines. The India that I love comprises the goodwill and good humor of ordinary people, a tolerance for all customs, a non-interference in other private lives, a friendly reciprocation at all times." Unquote. Bond's prose is more convincing in this collection than the poems. And in the part entitled as Children of India, Bond presents his love for childhood and the concerns for the issues of providing education in the hills of this country. Here he expresses the cultural life of Indian family like Bindra, whose father is a forest guard. Here my aim is to show his love for cultural diversity of this country. And in this collection, there is a poem, Coming Roaming With Me. Bond tries to portray imageries of hills where he finds a friendly space in the natural setting of these hills. Quote, "Out of the city, over the hill, into the spaces where time stands still," and skipping some lines, "crossing the little bridge, losing my way, but finding a friendly space where I can stay." And unquote. In the next poem, our local team, he represents the local cricket team, which has a symbolic token of colonial history of India. And in the next part, entitled as We Are 12, we can see Bond's emotional journey of staying with adoptive family of Prem who worked with him in 1970. At the very outset of this chapter, he says of the reason of choosing to live in the hills. Quote, "The people here are friendly, and then people are friendly in a great many other places. The hills, the valleys are very beautiful. People often ask me why I have chosen to leave Mussoorie for so long." Unquote. His sense of Indianness is also reflected in the choice of his Indian cultural name, like Savitri. But the girl child of Prem and Chandra shows her dissatisfaction of the given name. And in this chapter, my aim is to show Bond's cultural root in India. He shares his experience of meeting with a Lisbon Australian lady who has tried to drag him away from this beloved land, India. As he says, quote, "When I pursued by a Lisbon Australian lady who thought I would make a good obedient husband," I skip some lines, "anyone who has tried to drag me away from India has always met with South resistance." Unquote. In the part 7 entitled as Simple Living, here he describes his thoughts, observations noted in the hills through his diary in 1980s. And there is also one part where he shows his natural and mountains imageries in the Indian subcontinent. And in the ninth part, entitled as India I Carried With Me, Bond goes back to a period when he was caught between two worlds. As he says, within quote, I am here going back in time to a period when I caught between East and West and had to make up my mind just
Mr.
where I belong.
Das,
Yes, sir?
Mr. Das, please sum it
Yes,
up.
sir. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, sir. Okay, sir. And at the end, I would like to say his identity. Ruskin Bond's identity can be understood in terms of location, relocation, and dislocation. And I would like to conclude with the saying of Bonds in an interview taken by R.S. Sharma in Statesman of India that I am an Indian not by just birth but also by choice. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Das.
Thank you, sir.
And our next speaker will be Dr. Malavika Raut, who is an assistant professor in English in Amity University. And the title of her paper is The Power of Literature That Dealt with Pandemics Through Centuries and Why It Is Relevant in the Contemporary Times. So I would like to request Dr. Malavika Raut to present her paper.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm just taking 1 second to share my screen, sir.
Okay, please go ahead.
Sir, is my screen visible? Sir, is my screen visible?
Yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, organizers. Thank you, sir. I'm just briefing about the topic of my 1 second, please. People to move further.
Yes, please go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah. All right. The title of my paper, The Power of Literature That Dealt with Pandemics Through Centuries and Why It Is Relevant in the Contemporary Times. The contents of my paper is introduction, the material and methods, findings and analysis, discussion, and conclusion. Now, the moment we look at the pictures, are we sick of being cooped up at home, maybe trying to telework while the kids are screaming in another room? Are we tired of having to get swaddled in a mask and gloves to go out to the store, then anxious because people aren't maintaining the distance? Now, getting through the COVID-19 pandemic makes demands on our psyche. Resilience is one personality trait that will help us keep going with no end in sight. Now, well, there's a general agreement that resilience refers to positive adaptation to adversity. But there are different perspectives on how to exactly define resilience. My own view is that we need to think of resilience as the capacity of a system, whether that system is a person, a family, an economy, or a community, to adapt successfully to challenges that threaten the functioning, the survival, or the development of that system. All of us as individuals depend on many other systems for our resilience. I think what we are seeing right now in the midst of this catastrophic pandemic is that we all depend on the resilience of many systems in our lives. We are learning how interdependent we are and how much we depend on the support of other people, that is, our healthcare and many other emergencies of our community. Now we know that when we are talking about epidemics or pandemic, it is as old as the hills. The writers have contributed and they have nurtured, they have tried to instill the power of survival within us. Uh, Living with death is not a new version of our existence. As the method that has been chosen for the study, The Plague of Albert Camus, written in 1947, Margaret Atwood's The Year of the Flood in 209, Daniel Defoe's A Journal of the Plague Year in 1722, Rabindranath Tagore's poem The Old Manservant, and Ahmad Ali's novel Twilight in Delhi were the main reflection for the research study. So the question that triggered my mind is, has literature made any sense about pandemics for humanity? Definitely, there is a need to develop resilience because we know the capacity, the mental, the psychological, and the physiological conditions that keeps on fluctuating based on the context of our survival. The strength that we possess. There are adversities in life, and of course, a conducive and congenial environment is a necessity. The material and method. The purpose of the study examine the power of resilience saves the unnatural serpent ravaging human lives, leaving us destitute and crippled. The method was phenomenology. Qualitative research primary data is the writer's own observation derived from the depth of understanding and reflection. The books that was
Excuse me,
taken.
ma'am. Excuse
Yes,
me,
sir.
ma'am. Could you
Yeah.
please sum up the point because we are running out of time actually. So
Okay, sir.
if you
Sure,
kindly
sure.
sum up the point, okay?
Fine, sir. Fine.
Thank you.
So the findings and analysis was, has literature developed insight to triumph human spirit? Of course, imbalances are a regular feature in our life, whether it caters to physiological conditions or psychological perspectives. It is one of those problems of humanity that ruins a life. So how can we balance our very status of living life? Whether it is a pandemic, whether it is any invasion, riots, violence, or any means of death. We know there are risk factors that has engulfed our lives and how a child, a family, and the environment plays a pivotal role. But in spite of all the risk factors, mind and are the important factors in terms of our understanding to experience life. How does the society influences us is what our perspective is in context to the study, and that is how we are going to build up our strengths, our social skills and support that will enable us to understand life in a more meaningful way. The conclusion of the study was the dawn of consciousness that is really helping us to fight at every reason that life is bringing us on the dials. Now, through a resilient approach, literature has encompassed geographical connectedness to bridge borders and deal the devastation because when a pandemic strikes, a shared struggle envisage collective action. So when will peace prevail, no one knows, yet the struggles are nesting through diverse situations and environments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Our next speaker will be Mrs. Shipra Gorai. Shipra Gorai is an MPhil student in the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta, and she will talk about Adhar Bil O Kichu Manush, reading of Kalyani Thakur Charles novella In the Age of Apocalypse. Mrs. Shipra Gorai.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. So, my title of this paper is Andhar Bilo Kichu Manush, reading of Kalyani Thakur Charles novella In the Age of Apocalypse.
The post-pandemic world has introduced newly emerged expressions in literary academia, like emergency literature, crisis literature, disaster literature, etc. The experience of
Excuse me, just I'm interrupting. I request Dr. Malavika Rao to please stop sharing your slides. Dr.
Yes, sir.
Rao,
Yes, sir.
yeah, please stop sharing. Yeah, Mrs. Garai, you please go ahead. Mrs. Garai, yeah.
Yes, thank you. The experience of COVID pandemic reminds people the mythological prophecies about doomsday, apocalyptic disaster, etc. In other words, the end of this human civilization foretold by different religious mythologies. Secondly, this new sense of uncertainty, fear, loss, separation, casualty, helplessness, passivity, so on and so forth, sensibilities prepared human beings to revisit their misdeeds, act of pride, their power exercising ego, for being the sole possessor of intellectual faculty. The untamable nature of nature with capital N, even in the age of science, technology, becomes the cause of modern people's apprehension. Uncontrollable state of nature draws human being in the very initial stage of their civilization. Consequently, as academic world is no exceptional in experiencing such kind of trait of existence. Intellectuals or academicians are trying to forge themselves their accessories in accordance with the present state of crisis. Yes, it is true to say that literature reflects the time of its origin, but the enormous span and the monstruousness of this pandemic, which has affected irrespective of rich and poor, caste and creed and religion of almost all the countries in this globe, leave an impression of threat to human hubris and its poise living with an attitude of indifference. This unprecedented situation makes people vocal altogether about a new form of literary aestheticism, and this creates an opportunity as well as an intimacy for the so-called mainstream literary practitioners to have an insightful look into the so-called non-mainstream literature. The subject matters, narrative techniques, main objectives, way of living, living condition, relations between human nature and this entire world has, as described in the subaltern literatures, have to be taken under the main spotlight. This bottom-ups and periphery rights to the center method may show an alternative to the captive thought process of human being and may open a new vista of resilience. In the context of India, Dalit literature records a new form of crisis that shapes the definition of liminality of living, liminality of living, existential crisis, struggle for existence in a different way from the conventional dealing with crisis, disaster, and resilient power. This sudden discussion about the importance of resilience may be challenged by the way of living existence has been laid by the Dalits from the very day of their birth. Dalits are living within the atmosphere of crisis. Consequently, it becomes such people's inborn consciousness to deal with various type of crisis. Therefore, we can see a calm acceptance of lower scale natural disorders among these people and a sense of resilient power being united with one another. Andharpil o Kichu Manush provides an evidence of a such type of Dalit consciousness which is already present there in the living atmosphere of these people and not an individual's imbibe. Although it is often argued that anybody can incorporate any type of consciousness if she or he manages herself to occupy with a new consciousness. In this age of precarity, with full of absurdity and segregation, Dalit literature may help to mold human relation with nature, object, and with fellow beings in a new way that may provide ample scope to recover the lost condition of this art. Keeping in mind all this issue, my paper presents a reading of Kolani Thakur Cheral's novella Andhar Bilo Kichu Manush through the lens of apocalyptic literature. Um, uh, my next segment is nature and human being. Under the banner of this subtitle, I do restrict myself. I do restrict myself from uttering the expression like a human being in the lap of nature, and thereby I protest the tendency to impose a motherly figure upon nature, who is supposed to take care of children, of her children, protect her progenies from all vices, difficulties normalized by our gender stratified society. On the contrary, I would like to promote an equal coexistence, a camaraderie bonding between human being and nature. Therefore, being the intellectual being in this art, we, the human being, have to observe more vital role, responsibility, multiple duties to nurture this eco-friendly relationship with our greater environment. In order to
Okay,
do that,
Mrs. Karai, please conclude.
yes, yes.
Please conclude. Yeah.
Okay, so in order to do that, we have to change our outlook, dominant perceptions in various ways. This present novel taken for discussion in this paper will be able to throw, I think, a light on a large portion of the alternative sensibility, which is aspired for by this decaying time to reshape our new worldview, to rearrange our mindscape. Andhar Bilo Kichu Manus tells a story of nature, human relation in an offbeat manner. From the very title, we can understand that this biofiction is going to deal with the lives of some uprooted people and their dependency on natural objects. It is the story of devoted human beings and the consistency of a natural non-human being. The novella exemplifies what should be human non-human bonding through a lived experience. Komolini, who is a fictional portrayal of the author herself, is one of the central
Please
figures.
conclude, ma'am. Please
Yes.
conclude. Yeah.
Okay. So to conclude, I want to say that this novella tells the stories which is very much endowed with the spirit of love, vibrant warmth of life, and obviously full of immense, indomitable spirit of resilient power that helps these people to come back to life again and again. It is the story of struggle to cope with any kind of tough scenario, and it is not the story of romantic escapism or mere transcendentalism, but a story of materialistic lived experience. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Our next speaker is Mrs. Kajal Kumari. She is a PhD scholar in Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha
Yes.
University. Yeah, and she will talk about human resilience in A Thousand Splendid Suns. Please go ahead.
Joydeep, the earlier side
Yeah,
is still visible.
yeah. I have requested Dr. Malavika Raut.
I have posted twice asking her to stop sharing, but she hasn't done it yet.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
actually my laptop has hanged. I'm trying to remove it, but it's not removed.
It's making an obstacle here on the screen. Anyway.
Please switch off the laptop. I think it will work out then.
Okay,
Or
okay.
you can do one thing. You can leave the seminar. Okay, you can quit the seminar and then rejoin. Then
I
it will
have
go
done
ahead.
that, sir. Again, it is coming.
Okay.
I did it twice, sir. That's what I'm not finding out ways to, remove it.
No, you have to stop presentation. There is a button where it's written that stop presenting. There you
Sir,
have to click.
I did it, sir, but still it's not working. I'm consecutively trying, sir.
Okay, try because you can't follow others for that.
So I think we should go ahead, Arnab. Hello, Arnab. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Yeah, we should. I think we should go ahead. Yeah.
Please go
Yes,
ahead.
Yes. Yeah, Mrs. Kajal Kumari.
Hello, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. Am I audible?
Yeah. Please go ahead
Oh,
and sum up your points, okay? Because since we are running out of time, so others are also waiting to speak. So please, okay.
Okay, sir.
Mm.
So my topic is human resilience in Khalid Hosseini's novel A Thousand Splendid Suns. Afghanistan has suffered 4 decades of turmoil since the bloodless coup of Muhammad Dawood in 1973. The novel A Thousand Splendid Suns encompassed the time period of more than 50 years, the country before the coup to the overthrowing of the Taliban by the US in 2001. Though the stringent patriarchy plays a significant role in the sufferings of Afghan women, the war and the destruction caused by it exacerbates their miseries. In this paper, I would look into the different ways in which the Afghan people, and particularly women, adapt themselves and try to survive in a war-torn country. The novel begins with the story of Maryam, an illegitimate daughter of one of the wealthiest persons in Herat. The evils of a patriarchal society are visible through the hardships of Maryam and her mother Nana. Maryam has to face the brunt of being a harami throughout her life, although it wasn't her fault that she was born so. Her father Jalil is the main culprit, as her mother not only suffers from mental illness, but she also works as one of the housekeepers in Jalil's mansion, thus being lower in status and power to him. However, it is him who is least affected by his misdeed. He is first unfaithful to his wives and later to his child, but Nana and Maryam face the scorn of the society and live in a kind of banishment. In popular terms, resilience is having the capacity to persist in the face of change and to continue to develop in the ever changing environments. Mariam becomes the epitome of human resilience, as even after her mother's death, her father's betrayal, and an unsuitable marriage, she still hopes for a better future. All Mariam ever wanted was integration into the society and to be someone whom others cherished and loved. Her marriage to Rashid gave her the opportunity to be part of a legitimate relationship, to have family and a home of her own. She empathizes with Rashid for his child's death. She also creates a sense of coherence with the consideration that her pregnancy was a compensation for the troubles she had to face in the past. By doing so, by doing these, she utilizes positive psychological functioning to overcome her trauma. However, once she is unable to fulfill the duty of a woman in a patriarchal society, that is, giving birth to a male child, she has to come to terms with the reality of her husband's conduct. Rashid did not treat her as a prized possession whom he cared for and loved. For him, Mariam was a necessity to be tolerated and controlled in order to carry forward his lineage in form of male offsprings. After her miscarriage, instead of brooding or agonizing in seclusion over this misfortune, she takes up the path of positive religious coping by figuratively
Mrs.
burying her.
Ajal Kumari, sorry to interrupt
Sir,
you.
it's miss.
Please
Sir,
sum
it's
up your
miss.
points, okay? Instead of being descriptive, you please try to sum up the main points, okay? So that you can understand. Okay, please go.
Okay, sir. Sir, it's Miss Kajal Kumari. Okay. So after her miscarriage, instead of brooding or agonizing, she takes up the path of positive religious coping and by figuratively burying her unborn child, and active religious surrender by leaving everything to Allah. And so later, the other female protagonist is Lala, and she is, unlike Mariam, she is fortunate to be born to a loving and caring father who is not a patriarch, but this does not make her life less painful. It is the war that engulfed Afghanistan which eclipsed her life as well. So she transforms because in after the death of her parents because of the war, she transforms herself, and she has to come to terms with her tragic situation, where she has no living relative or friend to rely on, and she cannot leave Afghanistan due to lack of money and being in her earlier stage of pregnancy. So she adapts herself to her surrounding. So at the age of 14, she marries a man in his 60s for social security. She lies to the man Rashid about the child who was not his and stole from him regularly to gather enough money so that she could escape from the country. She transforms from an innocent, capable girl to a liar, a thief, and a child bride to survive. Mariam and Lala both suffered on the hands of faith and socio-political calamities. However, they found companionship among each other. This love gives Mariam chance to decide her own destiny for the first time. When she murders Rashid, she saves her loved ones from being murdered, and finally, her life ends with her being a companion, a guardian, and a mother. She gains the love and respect she craved
Please conclude, ma'am.
since childhood.
Please conclude. Please
Yeah,
conclude.
okay. Okay, sir. After going through these hardships and trauma, many have survived to tell their stories and wonder how they managed to do so. The new dawn of the country arrives with the US intervention. The novel ends with this on positive note. The death of Rashid metaphorically signifies the end of tyranny in the country, and the hope of rebirth of Mariam points to the new beginnings. The resilience of Lala, Mariam, and the people of Afghanistan is to be marveled at. When reconstruction begins in the country, people planted flowers in the Mujahideen rockets' empty shells and began calling them rocket flowers. Their adaptability, optimism, and hope could be surmised in the ghazal of Hafiz that Zaman had painted in the orphanage. Joseph should return to Canaan, grieve not. Hovis shall turn to rose gardens, grieve not. If a flood should arrive to drive all that's alive, Noah is your guide in the typhoon's eye, grieve not. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next speaker is Mrs. Navanita Karanjai, who is a research scholar in the Department of English, Bakura University, and she'll talk about resilience through nomadism, analyzing the grapes of wrath. I would request ma'am to please sum up your points instead of being going through the entire paper. Okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Very good afternoon to respected organizers, respected chairperson, and fellow paper presenters. In my paper, I am looking at John Steinbeck's novel, The Grapes of Wrath, in the light of the theory of nomadism by Rosie Braidotti. In her books, The Posthuman and Nomadic Subjects, Embodiment and Sexual Difference in Contemporary Feminist Theory, Braidotti points out some of the problematics of literary depictions of subjectivity, particularly the use of the natural environment in holding up a mirror to human nature. The humanist conception of nature has systematically relegated the environment to the role of the other, that is, simply as an object serving to offset human subjectivity, and thereby creating a dichotomy between the natural world and the culture of humanism and human species that has caused the alienation of the subject from the natural sphere. According to Braidotti, this alienation is responsible for the anthropocentrism that has caused many ecological crises, and the only way the ecological crises could be averted is by achieving an empathetic recognition with all those entities that are not considered human. Resilience could be achieved only when these empathetic recognition is achieved, and John Steinbeck achieves this kind of recognition by using metaphorical analogies of the subject with the non-human entities, specifically the pieces of technology, the pieces of agricultural technology, and the animals that dot the dried landscape of Oklahoma and California. His novel is set in the backdrop of the environmental disaster called the Dust Bowl, and the moral sentiments and acts of love at the center of the novel are explored through the metaphorical analogy that I just said. According to Steinbeck, I quote, "Farmers have transformed the world with their knowledge. However, the prospect of wages in farming ruptures the fruitfulness of the act of growing food when the destructive nature of capital is being introduced in the harvest. This opposition between the anthropocentric nature of agrarian practices, that is the logic of profit generation from the practice of growing food, and the resulting depletion of the natural world is highlighted by the metaphor of the tractor. The event of dispossession, which causes the creation of the removal migrant, which are the Jodes and the Wainwrights, is contained in the phrase "tractored out" that occurs throughout the novel. Similarly, the indifference of the more affluent motorists, who are actually members of large corporations that have brought about the drought that has caused the Dust Bowl in the first place on Highway 66, are called the insolent chariots of the exploiters. So the automobile owned by the affluent industrialists, as well as the tractors of the farmers, are seen as bringing about the disaster that has caused the dispossession of the indigenous farmers. Now, the resilience in the novel is seen with the analogy of the turtle that Steinbeck makes to show the odyssey of the Jode family across Highway 66. In chapter 14, Marjord asserts, I quote, that we are
Ma'am,
the people. Yes.
excuse me, ma'am. Excuse
Yes.
me. Yeah,
Yes.
please conclude because we are
We
really
are,
running out of time. Yeah.
we are the people that live and we are the people that go on. Therefore, at the end of the novel, we see that the Jords are moving ahead in the manner of American pioneers, but they are altered in consciousness because they move forward with the idea of humanity as a single community and not as solitary questers searching for a lost Eden. The immense dignity that Steinbeck imparts to these wandering farmers is proof of his belief that only the rejection of egotistical pursuit of rationality symbolized in the automobile zooming across the American landscape in favor of a shared sense of subjectivity is the only resolution or solution to the problem of imminent ecological disasters. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I would like to request Mrs. Paulomi Modak, who is a junior research fellow in the Department of English, Kuchbihar Panchanan Burma University, to present her paper. Mrs. Paulomi Modak.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, am I audible?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. A very good evening to all of you. I am Poulumi Modak, a junior research fellow in the Department of English, Bihar Panchanan Burma University. As the respected sir has mentioned already, the topic of my discussion in this regard is rethinking resilience, Penelope Lively's narrative of struggle, strength and survival in Moon Tiger. The unusual resilience narrative that I have chosen is based on Lively's postmodernist and Booker Prize winning novel, Moon Tiger, which remarkably elucidates the concomitant issues of a dysfunctional family, incest as a trauma, incest as taboo, the chronic disease, the parental frustration, the question of motherhood, and a plethora of other significant, important contemporaneous issues. The denotation of the novel is resilience as a response to the chronic illness. Claudia Hampton, who is the narrator and as well as the protagonist of the novel, is now at her 77, has been fighting a futile battle against cancer in a London hospital. So what we find, if we discuss the novel from a gerontological perspective, this will allow us to underscore that the resilience of Claudia in her deathbed is that which is motivated surprisingly through a difficult task that the protagonist is quite confident to proceed with. Being a historian by profession, being an unconventional historian as a kind of profession of a time, Claudia Hampton is now trying to remitigate the history of the world. She is trying to refashion the history of the world, and thereby she is trying to renegotiating the history of her own self as well. Being indifferent to the chronic illness that she is bearing within, it is her resilience that enables her to go on at her age of 77 to compose. Here I would like to quote from the text itself: a history of the world, and yes, in that process, my own, the life and times of Claudia Hampton, the history of the world as selected by Claudia, fact and fiction, myth and evidence, images and documents. The analysis of the novel further illuminates that it is not merely in her matured years that she has been fighting against the odds. Rather, since her childhood, since her early age of time, Claudia is through the modality of resistance, she is fighting against every sort of odds regarding the dysfunctional family, the depressed parents, and the sibling incest. So what we find, that the absence of the father figure and as well as the withdrawal of the mother figure could not repress the unsurpassable strength of resilience within this character, within this narrator, since her childhood, that somehow enable her to transcend herself as an indomitable kind of aspect of personality. Having said that, what we further find that the unavailability of the father and as well as the mother figure affects the sexual behavior of the character as well as her own brother Jordan. In that sense, the growing kids, they are affected through a sense into which they committed incest, they committed sibling incest. Having said all this, what we find that the occurrence of incest, though, is a kind of embarrassing history, a kind of embarrassing past experience for Claudia. Through her assertive characteristic, she refused to be kind of unapologetic for committing what is known as what is forever forbidden. I'm referencing here the occurrence of incest. This deliberation of perseverance further enables her to survive the frustration, the anxiety, the trauma regarding miscarriage, which is the consequence of the untimely death of Claudia's lover, that is Tom, due to the havoc and destruction of the Second World War. So what we find that Claudia bears the trait of resilience. The narrator is having this kind of trait of resilience, but through her myriad form of struggles, through her myriad form of resistance, she is enabling herself to be kind of a personality, to be kind of characteristic who sustains against every sort of societal, personal, and as well as familial calamity. We very often tend to describe the concept of resilience through a multifarious of narrations, but the most popular expression would be that resilience is a kind of ability of adaptability in adverse situation. Therefore, in my conclusion, as time is limited, in my conclusion, I'd like to say that through this ability, through this trait of successful adaptability, it is Claudia that is transcending, that is exemplifying her journey as a story of female liberation through the indomitable will of resilience. With this, I'd like to sum up my short discussion.
Thank you, Mrs. Paulami Modak, for nicely negotiating with the time. Our last speaker in this technical session is Mr. Savi Khera, who is a research scholar in the Department of English and Foreign Languages, Maharshi Dayanand University, Rohtak. And the title of his paper is Representation of Violence and Resilience in Literature. I would like to request Mr. Khera to present his paper. Mr. Khera. Mr. Savi Khera. Mr. Savi Khera, is he present? I think he's not here, I think.
Joydeep, I just now scrolled back the list, but I couldn't see him anywhere.
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah, I think he's not present. So in that case, we have had all the speakers presented their papers. So so should we conclude here, ma'am?
Yes, Joydeep, if there is no queries or questions,
I'm going to
conclude, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to request the audience, if you have any observations, if you have any queries, the session is open to all, and you can ask your queries or you can make any observations if you would like to.
Okay, technical team, I want to ask them, how should we remove this slide? Because the next will be valedictory address, and if we cannot see any of the faces, it is really embarrassing. No, I mean, I am not finding. I'm only finding the slide. It's fixed there. Is it same for you, Joydeep?
Malavika Rao said that she has already left the meeting, but still the screen is showing, I mean, whatever she was
So
sharing.
I would like to request the technical team, what can be done in this case? Shomik is writing something. Sutapa madam, would you just follow what he has to suggest?
Okay, he's saying that I think if the laptop is switched off, it might be fine, but I don't know whether she has switched off her laptop.
No, I think, Sutapa madam, if there is any question answer, I think we can go ahead with that. And then
Yes, in
just
that case,
before the...
participants can unmute themselves and ask the questions.
Yeah. Anybody like to make any observation? I think there is...
I think there is no
observation. Yeah. Yes. So it's a wonderful session. All the paper presenters, I would like to first apologize to all the paper presenters for repeatedly reminding of the time constraint, and that I have to do for the practical reasons, actually, because that I have been asked to do so. So that's why, because we have been given 1 hour 30 minutes and we are now well over of our allotted time. And it's a wonderful session. I would like to thank and congratulate all the paper presenters for their beautiful perceptions, insight into the issue. And today, in the inaugural session, I mean, when I was listening to Professor Avijit Shen's brilliant deliberation, there once he said that disaster comes with multiple phases. And this multiple phases means the multiple dimensions that a disaster connotes to. So there is natural disaster and there is man-made disaster. But the boundary between these two types of disaster, it's often blurred. And this act of blurring, that creates a lot of questions, that raises a lot of queries, observations, and a lot of, issues. So here in this second part of the technical session, I think those queries, those dimensions have been addressed by each of the paper presenters, from the partition narrative to the issue of women, from gender, sexuality, from the marginal literature, marginal narratives. So almost all, issues have been addressed here by the speakers. So I would like to thank each of them for that. And this seminar, I would like to thank also the organizer of this seminar for this beautiful topic, for the beautiful theme that they have chosen, particularly in the current context of our corona pandemic. I mean, it becomes all the more important, such a theme and such a topic. So with all this, I would like to thank all of you, and I would like to hand it over to the organizer of this webinar, Dr.
Joydeep.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. But I'm tempted to comment that, as you rightly pointed out, the range and depth of vision of all those young scholars, those who are engaged directly with research, and the kind of topics that they have chosen, it really speaks volumes about the concern that our young generation and the young scholars have. And one thing I have observed here that they are really doing research in various upcoming fields. And in that sense, if you start from the morning till the end of the last paper, I mean, it has really opened up new avenues for us to think, and that the resilience, the whole concept of resilience and its contemporary relevance, how should we address it, starting from the making of a nation and the kind of deprivation and the politics of presentation and representation. So I should thank all the participants for that purpose, and I really wish that those who are doing PhD in various topics will, within 2 or 3 years, produce brilliant work. And that is the kind of satisfaction where we will also be a part. And that's really a satisfaction which I want to share with my colleagues and with all of you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Yes, we can proceed with our scheduled program now. Ishwar, I mean, you can
Yes,
move
sir.
on.
I'm there.
Yes, you please carry on.
Yes. Thank you, Arnab sir, for your beautiful of the entire webinar. And thank you, Dr. Joydeep Bhattacharya, for skillfully delegating this session of this webinar. Also, thank you to all the paper presenters for their contributions. With so rich and varied presentations from the academicians across the whole of India, we definitely find ourselves more aware now. Today, Surya Sen Mahavidyalaya is proud to be the melting pot of such ideas and shared realizations. I shall now request the joint convener of this webinar and the head of the Department of English, Surya Sen Mahavidyalaya, to convey her valedictory address for this webinar. Over to you, Sutapa ma'am.
Thank you, Ishwar. And thank you, Deep, for skillfully handling the previous session and for chairing the session. And I also thank all the participants for being so very time-bound and their wonderful presentations. And actually, we have noticed over a period of time that different narratives and storytelling in many ways shapes the way we understand and experience diseases, illness, calamity, disaster, and trauma. And we are also now discovering that literary texts not only keep us connected, but also help us grapple with situations and our experiences. And my latest finding might sound interesting here. While a virus outbreak with origins in China's Wuhan city walks out into the world in 2020, a character in 37th edition of Asterix Comics 2017 was actually named coronavirus. And the book depicts the characters like this: the masked Ogira and the great coronavirus and his faithful Bacillus. And the original book was released over 2 years before Wuhan reported its first case of coronavirus last year. So it is interesting to bear in mind that the masked villain coronavirus in the end to win. So this reference proves some continuity with a past obliterated by the same virus, and human history has survived many moments, many such moments of crisis, disaster, and calamity, and given birth to several well-known writings. And as our keynote speaker, Professor Abhijit Sen, today has rightly pointed out, that disaster has multiple phases, starting natural to man-induced disaster. And that is why resilience would be multi-layered, of course. And we really got the glimpse of some of these in a number of papers presented in today's sessions. The Holocaust narratives, Kashmir Valley's struggle for survival in their poetry, representation of violence and resilience in other disaster narratives, power of literature at the time of disaster, Hemingway's vision of resistance through his characters, disturbed psychological states of mind, and so on. And currently, when we all were quarantined, online informations became our best friends in terms of connectivity. And one of the papers today was on comics, illustrations in Instagram and social media. That was a way of communicating and also writing that captured the moments of human emotions at the time of a mass crisis. And they help us to find a sense of life in those crucial moments and attach us back to people and life when we actually got detached from each other. So life and human existence appears to be precious in true sense. And today some papers discussed how to assimilate in diaspora, and one paper was there about understanding of the cosmogenesis of survival during epidemic. In another paper, we heard the discussion about the representational mechanism through the depiction of servant characters resisting racial hatred. And in another, there was a discussion about individual rights, human liberty, and how books can be effective to challenge agencies of repression. I mean, all these papers, they were wonderful presentations, but I mean, it is really difficult to touch upon each and every paper right now. So all these papers, actually, they tell stories about human disasters, about the lengths we will go to survive. They convey how in this crisis, predictability disappears. And we have also heard how climate change and other factors create a posthuman resilient text. We have heard about deprivation of language, how humans have become the root cause of disaster and reason for species at risk. And we must contend with the reality we are not masters of the world. We have seemingly become such lords of universe that we have altered the very climate and taken control of nature. And geologists have named our after humanity itself, and yet a virus can have more power than an army. And you see, yesterday's glacier burst in Uttarakhand is another disaster that signals triggering of more in future, which are impending. And we heard about people's resilience that lives with the hope of better days. And we also heard how music becomes the silver lining in the crucial moments of life. And again, I have to refer to Professor Shen's points where he was saying that literature is more real than real, a greater truth than the truth, and literature will be able to give us some message to come together in future. So actually, narrative is an attempt to stave off meaninglessness and serves the purpose of trying. If there is not meaning outside the quarantine zone, there is at least meaning within our invented stories. So narratives are recounted to create meaning, to bear witness, to make sense, to warn, to exclaim that we were here, that we are still here, and narrative can preserve and remake the world as it falls apart. So due to time crunch, it's not possible to refer to each individual paper, but truly we enjoyed all the presentations today. And we are planning to publish a book with ISBN number with the best, say 12 to 15 papers that would be selected by our committee. We'll let you know about it in due time. And for the past few days, we have been in continuous touch with each other. Hope to meet you again in another virtual platform in near future. So be good, take care, and keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for keeping up with the ethos of disaster, resilience, society, and literature until the very end, and leaving us with a note of realization.
And Ishwar, I have one more thing to say here, that after the vote of thanks, we'll be make the announcement regarding our feedback link and the certificate, distribution of certificate. After the vote of thanks.
Sure, ma'am. I now request Dr. Sanchita Das from the Department of English, Surya Sen Mahavidyalaya, to outlay a vote of thanks for this event. After this vote of thanks, we would be filling up the form and we would be sharing the link. So please stay until the end of the vote. To you, Dr. Sanchita Das.
Good evening all. We have reached to the end of this webinar, and on behalf of the Department of English, Surya Sen Mahavidyalaya, I take this opportunity to propose vote of thanks to those who have contributed to this ICSSR sponsored national webinar, Society, Disaster and Resilience, Lessons from Literature, organized by Department of English, Surya Sen Mahavidyalaya, Siliguri. At the outset, I would like to thank Indian Council of Social Science Research, Eastern Regional Kolkata, for financial assistance. I would like to thank all the experts of academic excellence, Dr. Jaydeep Sharangi, Principal, New Alipur College, Kolkata, our keynote speaker, Dr. Abhijit Sen, Professor, Department of English and other modern European languages, Vishwabharati, our invited speaker and resource person, Dr. Debashri Prasad Nath, Professor, Department of Cultural Studies, Tezpur University, and Dr. Vinayak Roy, Assistant Professor, Department of English, University of North Bengal, Shiliguri. I would also like to thank our deliberators in session chair, Dr. Amitabh Roy, Vice Principal and Associate Professor, Department of English, Alipurduar Mahila Mahavidyalaya, Alipurduar, and Dr. Joydeep Bhattacharya, Associate Professor, Department of English, Karshan College. We are thankful to our GV President, Sri Joyanta Maulik, for his kind patronage. We would like to thank our Principal Sir, Dr. Pranab Kumar Mishra, for his enthusiastic support. We'd also like to thank Professor Sutapa Saha, Head of the Department of English, Surya Sen Mahavidyalaya, and Convener Dr. Arnold Ball, Department of English, for the initiative and making this webinar successful. We also thank the organizing committee, teaching staffs for their unflinching support and coordination. We thank Dr. Shufal Bishas, Convener, Establishment Cell, and Dr. Shantanu Das, Librarian of Surya Sen Mahavidyalaya, for special assistance. We thank Professor Saurabh Burman, Department of Computer Science, for technical assistance. A special thanks to Professor Sudeshna Mondal, Department of Geography, Surya Sen Mahavidyalaya, for being with us always. Our heartfelt thanks to all the participants who have joined in this virtual platform from all over the country. With these warm words and a kind message, we move to the end of today's webinar. Thank you.
The committee has decided to mail the feedback link to your individual mail IDs, all the participants. So we'll be mailing the feedback link over to you, and also the certificate also will be mailed to you in due time, but it will take some time, few days maybe. So please wait for the feedback link, which will be mailed to you, to all the participants.
Thank you everyone for our webinar and being so patient all throughout and sharing your ideas, views and your papers of this webinar. And I would give the baton to Arnav sir to fulfill the formalities. Thank you everyone.
Thank you, Ishwar. The formalities are over. I have nothing to say. I just want to extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you. I'm not going to single out anybody. It was wonderful meeting you and conversing with you, disturbing you time and again with our hard approach, but you can understand why we have to do so. We have been able to finish it within the stipulated span of time. And as I've already told you, that our aim was to not to hold a seminar, but a timely seminar which will respond to the kind of crisis that we are passing through. And I'm personally very happy that with the help of all my colleagues and all of you, we have really attained a new height so far the exploration of this topic is concerned. I think if we are serious, we can really find out many trajectories from the kind of deliberations that we have presented today. I mean, it has opened up Pandora's box in exploring new ideas, and that is what is important for an webinar. It's not simply presenting a paper, but it is important how we discuss, how we carry forward the kind of discussion that has been initiated here today. And from that count, I'm sure that in future also, if you're going to explore new ideas, that will be quite a matter of great satisfaction as organizers for all of us. And I also believe that this relationship will continue. Anytime if you feel that as colleague, we can share our ideas, you are most welcome. Our department is going to welcome you with our warm hands. And we have struck a new relation today. And I believe that this relation will continue for long. Meaningfully and academically satisfying one it will be one day. So thank you again on behalf of the committee, and as a coordinator, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to all of you to make it a very grand success. Thank you all. So with these words, I think this is the end. We are not feeling very good because we have been associated with all of you so long, for the last 1 month, I believe. And well, this recording will be available. You can refer to this anytime in YouTube. It will refresh your memory that from North Bengal, from a college, we are trying to address all the members across India, and that is the most satisfying factor, from Jammu Kashmir to Guwahati to the Karnataka to Kerala, everywhere. And that is something where I will always stress upon, that how you all are thinking, how Indians are thinking, how the new scholars, the budding scholars of India, they are thinking, that we wanted to know. And I have come to know, and I'm sure all my colleagues have also come to know, that we are thinking in the same direction. We are feeling in the same way. We have something to do as intellectuals. It is our responsibility to point out the truth which is not exposed, the truth which has always been covered by various agencies. As academicians, it is our responsibility to unfurl that, to open up the fissures and find out what is the reality. That is, I think, important. That is the notion of resilience that we must cling to. Thank you. So the meeting ends here. We can all leave now.
Yes, thank you very much, Arnav.
Yes.